The conference room overlooked Manhattan's glittering skyline, but Lydia Cole only had eyes for one thing: the financial disclosure folder that would make her a $100 million woman. Her manicured fingers drummed against imported Italian leather as her attorney outlined the division of assets. Across the polished mahogany table, her husband Evan sat impossibly still, his calloused hands folded, his expression unreadable. She'd married a builder, suffered through a decade of his quiet devotion, and now, finally, it was payday. But when his lawyer slid the updated documents across the table, Lydia's triumphant smile began to fracture. The number at the bottom made her heart stop. Net worth, 0. If you want to see how a quiet man outplays a calculated betrayal, stay until the end. And if you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale of justice travels. The morning started like any other Wednesday in the Cole household, except Lydia had been awake since 4 a.m., her pulse thrumming with anticipation that no amount of chamomile tea could settle. She stood before her walk-in closet, a shrine of designer labels acquired over 10 carefully patient years, and selected a cream Armani suit that whispered success without shouting desperation. The fabric cost more than most people's monthly rent, purchased with Evan's credit card 3 weeks earlier. She'd told him it was for a charity luncheon. In a way, that wasn't entirely a lie. Today was charitable. To herself. Lydia examined her reflection with the critical eye of a woman who'd spent a decade perfecting an image. Honey blonde highlights that cost $800 every 6 weeks. Pilates sculpted figure maintained by a personal trainer she'd never once thanked. Subtle Botox that kept her forehead smooth even when she smiled, which she did now, practicing the expression she'd wear when her attorney announced the settlement terms. 50% of everything. That was New York law. No prenup meant marital property split straight down the middle, and Evan Cole, her quiet, methodical, utterly predictable husband, had built an empire worth north of $200 million. The math made her giddy. "You're up early?" Evan's voice came from the bedroom doorway. Lydia didn't startle. She'd heard his footsteps. He moved the way he did everything, with deliberate care that she'd once mistaken for thoughtfulness and now recognized as simply slow. She turned, her smile perfectly calibrated. "Big day at the foundation," she said smoothly, referencing the charity board position she'd accepted 2 years ago. Evan had been so proud, thinking she'd finally found purpose beyond their marriage. In truth, the foundation had been strategic networking, wealthy women whose divorce attorneys had sterling reputations. Evan nodded, his dark eyes studying her with that unsettling focus he sometimes had, like he was calculating load-bearing weights or structural integrity. At 42, he still had the build of a man who'd worked construction sites before owning them: broad shoulders, strong hands, silver threading through dark hair at his temples. He wore his usual uniform, dark jeans, a plain gray Henley, work boots even though he mostly managed from offices now. So utterly ordinary, so perfectly unaware. "Marianne called last night," he said. "Wanted to know if we're coming to Sunday dinner." Lydia's smile tightened fractionally at the mention of Evan's mother. Marianne Cole was a relic from another era, a widow who'd raised Evan alone after his father died in a construction accident when Evan was 12. The woman still lived in the same modest house in Queens, still volunteered at the same church, still wore sensible shoes and carried her late husband's lunchbox to the community garden she maintained. Everything about Marianne was aggressively humble, a constant reminder of the working-class roots Lydia had worked so hard to distance Evan from. "I'll have to check my calendar," Lydia said, which they both knew meant no. Evan's jaw tightened slightly, the only tell that he'd heard the rejection. "She misses you." "I miss her too," Lydia lied, turning back to her mirror, dismissing him. In the reflection, she watched him linger for a moment before leaving, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floors of the penthouse they'd purchased 5 years ago. The penthouse she'd soon own half of, along with half of everything else. By 8:30, Lydia was seated in the back of a hired car, scrolling through her phone as Manhattan streamed past the tinted windows. Her attorney, Patricia Gaines, had sent the meeting agenda at 7 a.m. sharp. Patricia was a legend in matrimonial law, a woman who'd extracted record-breaking settlements from hedge fund managers, tech CEOs, even a Hollywood producer who'd thought his prenup was ironclad. She charged $800 an hour and was worth every cent. Patricia. Everything's in order. Today we present terms. His attorney will bluster. Evan will look wounded. But the law is the law. 50-50 split, plus spousal maintenance given the lifestyle you've maintained. Conservative estimate, $120 million liquid, plus the penthouse, the Hamptons property, and ongoing support of $500,000 annually. Lydia read the message 3 times, her heart rate accelerating with each pass. $120 million. Even split 3 ways with Patricia's fees and taxes, she'd walk away with enough to never work, never compromise, never pretend to care about construction permits or foundation meetings or Sunday dinners in Queens ever again. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Marcus. Marcus. Good luck today, beautiful. Drinks tonight to celebrate? She smiled, deleting the message immediately, a habit she'd perfected over the 8 months of their affair. Marcus Ashford was everything Evan wasn't. Sophisticated, cultured, exciting. A venture capitalist with an art collection and a sailing yacht who appreciated fine wine and understood that marriage was often a business arrangement that had simply run its course. He'd been understanding about the timeline, patient while she positioned herself for the optimal financial outcome. After today, she wouldn't need to be patient anymore. The law offices of Gaines and Associates occupied the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown. Lydia had been here 3 times before. Initial consultation, document review, strategy session, and each visit had reinforced her confidence. This wasn't emotional, it was transactional. A decade of marriage, no prenup, substantial assets. The law was clear. Patricia met her in the reception area, immaculate in navy Chanel, her silver hair cut in a sharp bob that matched her even sharper reputation. At 58, she had the focused energy of a woman who'd won too many battles to fear the next one. You look perfect, Patricia said, assessing Lydia with approval. Confident but not arrogant, successful but not greedy. The optics matter, even in a no-fault state. They walked together toward the conference room, Patricia's heels clicking against marble floors. Evan's attorney is James Whitfield, competent but conventional. He'll try to negotiate down the maintenance, maybe quibble about asset valuation. Let me handle him. You just stay composed, no matter what they say. I'm always composed, Lydia said. Patricia's smile was knowing. Some men try to make it personal at the end. Accusations, emotional appeals. It's just noise. Remember, the law doesn't care who did what. It only cares about equitable distribution. The conference room was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a table that could seat 20, abstract art that probably cost more than a car. Evan was already there when they entered, seated beside a man Lydia assumed was Whitfield. But it was Evan who captured her attention. He looked different. No, he looked the same, exactly the same, but something in his posture had shifted. He sat completely relaxed, one arm draped over the back of his chair, his expression utterly calm. Not wounded, not defensive, just still. Unnervingly still. Lydia, he said, his voice neutral. Patricia. Evan, Patricia replied coolly, taking her seat. Shall we begin? James Whitfield was exactly what Patricia had described. Mid-50s, competent-looking, with the slightly rumpled appearance of a man who prioritized substance over style. He opened his briefcase with efficient movements, extracting a folder that looked considerably thinner than the comprehensive asset documentation Patricia had prepared. Before we discuss settlement terms, Whitfield said, we need to address the updated financial disclosure. Patricia's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose fractionally. Updated? We received Mr. Cole's financial statement 6 weeks ago. Unless there's been a significant material change, there has, Whitfield interrupted gently, sliding documents across the table. Lydia felt the first flicker of unease as Patricia opened the folder. She watched her attorney's face carefully. Patricia had a legendary poker face, never revealing surprise or concern. But something changed in her expression now, a microscopic tightening around her eyes. This can't be accurate, Patricia said, her voice sharp. It's entirely accurate, Whitfield replied. Certified by 2 independent accountants, notarized, filed with the court this morning. Lydia reached for the documents, her hands suddenly cold. The pages were dense with legal language and financial terminology, but she'd learned enough during the divorce preparation to understand the key sections. Her eyes scanned quickly, looking for the asset summary, the net worth calculation, the magic numbers that would fund her new life. When she found them, her vision actually blurred. Current assets, $0. Current liabilities, $0, and net worth, $0. That's impossible, she heard herself say, her voice strange and distant. The buildings, the properties, the investments, there are hundreds of millions in assets. Where did they go? Whitfield's expression remained professionally neutral. Mr. Cole's assets have been legally transferred into an irrevocable family trust, with his mother, Marianne Cole, as the sole trustee and beneficiary. The room seemed to tilt. Lydia gripped the edge of the table, her carefully maintained composure fracturing. When did this happen? The transfers began 8 weeks ago, Whitfield said. Completed 3 weeks ago, all properly documented, all legally executed, all absolutely legitimate under New York law. 8 weeks, Lydia repeated, her mind racing backward. 8 weeks ago, Evan had seemed normal. They'd had dinner together. He'd asked about her day. He'd kissed her forehead before bed. He'd been quiet, watchful, different. She'd been so focused on her own plans she hadn't noticed his. Patricia had recovered her composure, her legal mind already working through angles. This is clearly fraudulent conveyance, a blatant attempt to shield assets from equitable distribution. We'll file motions immediately. It's not fraudulent conveyance, Whitfield interrupted, his tone still gentle but firm. Fraudulent conveyance requires intent to defraud creditors or to evade existing legal obligations. At the time of these transfers, no divorce proceedings had been filed. No legal claims existed. Mr. Cole simply chose to gift his assets to his elderly mother, which is entirely within his rights. The timing is suspect, Patricia snapped. Obviously calculated. The timing is explainable, Whitfield countered. Mrs. Marianne Cole is 71 years old. Mr. Cole has been her sole support since his father's death. These transfers represent estate planning and elder care provision, perfectly legal motivations. Lydia found her voice again, though it came out higher than intended. This is ridiculous. He can't just give away everything we built together. We? Evan spoke for the first time since the meeting began, and something in his tone made Lydia's breath catch. What exactly did you build, Lydia? She stared at him across the table. His expression remained calm, but his eyes, those dark, calculating eyes she'd always thought were simple, held something she'd never seen before. Knowledge, strategy, power. I was your wife, she said, the words coming out defensive. I supported you. You attended charity events, Evan said quietly. You decorated our homes, you spent money, but you didn't build anything. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. I know about Marcus. The air left Lydia's lungs. I know about the affair, Evan continued, his tone conversational, as if discussing weather. 8 months, meeting Tuesdays and Thursdays when you claimed to have foundation meetings. The Peninsula Hotel, usually room 2847, registered under his name. I know about the texts, the plans, the timeline you two discussed for maximizing the financial outcome of our divorce. Lydia's face burned. She looked at Patricia, desperate for intervention, but her attorney's expression had shifted from confident to calculating, already reassessing the strength of their position. You were spying on me, Lydia managed. I was paying attention, Evan corrected, something I should have done years ago. He sat back again, that unsettling calm returning. But the affair isn't relevant here. New York is a no-fault state, as I'm sure Patricia explained to you. Infidelity doesn't impact asset distribution. Then why mention it? Patricia asked sharply. Context, Evan said simply. So Lydia understands that I didn't act impulsively or emotionally. I acted deliberately with full knowledge of the situation. Whitfield cleared his throat gently. Given the current asset situation, we're prepared to proceed with a simple dissolution of marriage. No assets to divide, no support obligations given Mr. Cole's current financial status. Clean, quick, final. This won't stand, Patricia said, but Lydia heard the uncertainty beneath the bluster. We'll challenge every transfer, depose the mother, examine every transaction. You can certainly try, Whitfield agreed. That's your right. But I'll be transparent about what you'll find. Legitimate transfers, proper documentation, clear legal authority. Mrs. Cole has already consulted with her own attorney. Independent counsel, no conflicts. She'll testify that she accepted these assets gladly, that she intends to maintain them, that her son's generosity toward his elderly mother is both appropriate and appreciated. He paused, letting that sink in. You'll also find that pursuing this course will be extraordinarily expensive, with discovery costs, expert witnesses, and appeals that could take years. And at the end of that expensive, exhausting process, you'll very likely lose, because the law in this area is quite clear. Lydia felt reality crashing down around her carefully constructed plans. The penthouse, the lifestyle, the future she'd envisioned, all of it evaporating like morning fog. "There has to be something," she said, hating the desperation in her voice. "The prenup waiver, the lifestyle I maintained, the expectation." "Expectations aren't contracts," Evan said, and now she heard something else in his voice. Not anger, not satisfaction, something closer to sadness. "I know you think I'm stupid, Lydia. Slow, simple. Just a guy who works with his hands and doesn't understand your sophisticated world." He stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate movements. "But I built a $200 million company from nothing. I understand contracts, leverage, timing, and risk management. I understand people, too, their motivations, their breaking points, when they're genuine and when they're performing." Evan looked at her fully now, and Lydia saw herself reflected in his eyes. Not the polished, perfect version she'd cultivated, but something smaller, more desperate. "I understand that you never loved me. That's painful, but I can accept it. What I won't accept is being treated like a fool, like a mark, like something to be exploited and discarded." He moved toward the door, Whitfield gathering papers to follow. "You're free, Lydia. Completely free. No marriage, no obligations, no ties. You can have Marcus or whoever else you want. You just won't have my money." "Evan, wait." Lydia stood, her chair scraping harshly against polished floors. He paused at the doorway, looking back one final time. "My attorney will send the final dissolution papers. They're straightforward. You'll find no surprises. Sign them, file them, and we're done." His voice softened slightly, almost gentle. "I hope you find whatever it is you're really looking for. I don't think it was ever actually money." Then he was gone, Whitfield closing the door quietly behind them. The silence in the conference room was absolute. Lydia stood frozen, her mind refusing to process what had just happened. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She'd planned everything, timed everything perfectly. She was supposed to be celebrating right now, texting Marcus about dinner plans, mentally redecorating the penthouse in a style Evan had never appreciated. Instead, she had nothing. "Sit down," Patricia said, her voice clipped. "We need to discuss options." Lydia sank into her chair, suddenly exhausted. "What options? He gave everything away." "We challenged the transfers," Patricia said, but she was already scrolling through her phone, probably calculating billable hours versus probability of success. Fraudulent conveyance, undue influence on the mother, conspiracy. You just heard Whitfield. It's legal. "Legal but challengeable," Patricia insisted. The timing suggests he's smarter than I thought," Lydia interrupted. "And you know it." She looked at her attorney, really looked at her, and saw the truth Patricia wasn't saying. "You think we'd lose?" Patricia's silence was answer enough. "How much would it cost to fight?" "Conservatively? 300,000 to 500,000 in legal fees, possibly more if it goes to appeals." Lydia laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "I don't have 300,000. Everything I have is in our joint accounts, which are probably already frozen." She pulled out her phone, suddenly panicked, opening her banking app. Sure enough, all joint accounts showed pending restrictions initiated that morning by Evan's attorney. Her personal checking account, the one linked to cards Evan paid off monthly, had a balance of $12,000. $12,000. 3 weeks ago, she'd spent more than that on a purse. "The penthouse," she started. "In the trust," Patricia confirmed, having clearly already reviewed the transfer documents. "Along with the Hamptons house, the construction company, the investment properties, all of it. How is that even possible? Don't I have to consent to transfers of marital property?" "Technically, they're not marital property anymore," Patricia explained, her tone slipping into lecture mode. "And in New York, Transfers to family members, especially for estate planning purposes, don't require spousal consent if the transferor retains access and benefit, which Evan does through the trust structure. Lydia's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table, trying to control the tremor. There has to be something, some angle, some leverage. The affair, Patricia said thoughtfully. If we could prove the trust formation was in direct response to discovering your relationship with Ashford, you heard Evan, New York doesn't care about infidelity. For asset distribution, no. But it might matter for the fraud claim, establishing malicious intent. Patricia's fingers flew over her keyboard, pulling up case law. If we can show he created the trust specifically to punish you, he didn't create it to punish me, Lydia said slowly, the realization settling over her like cold water. He created it to protect himself and his mother. The affair just made him smarter about protecting what he built. She thought about Marianne Cole, quiet, humble Marianne, with her sensible shoes and her modest house. Marianne, who'd raised Evan alone, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep him fed and clothed, who taught him that hard work and integrity mattered more than flash or status. Marianne, who'd probably known exactly what kind of woman Lydia was from the first Sunday dinner she'd skipped. He went to his mother, Lydia said. When he found out about Marcus, he went to Marianne. Patricia looked up from her screen. So she helped him. She accepted the assets because she knew. Lydia's voice cracked. She knew I was using her son. That's speculation. It's the truth, Lydia interrupted. And you know what? Any jury will believe it. The devoted son protecting his elderly mother by securing her future. The working-class kid made good, making sure his mom is taken care of. It's a perfect story. Patricia closed her laptop slowly. What are you saying? I'm saying we can't win. Lydia stood, gathering her purse with numb fingers. Even if the law was on our side, which it's not, the optics are impossible. I'm the unfaithful wife trying to take money from a 71-year-old widow. We'd lose in court, lose in public opinion, lose everything. Lydia, send me your final bill, Lydia said, moving toward the door. I'll need to set up a payment plan. She walked out of the conference room, through the elegant reception area, into the elevator that carried her down 42 floors. Each descending level felt like shedding a piece of the life she'd constructed. The penthouse? Gone. The lifestyle? Gone. The future she'd envisioned? Gone. The lobby was full of important people doing important things, and Lydia moved through them like a ghost. Outside, Manhattan assaulted her senses. Car horns, construction noise, the smell of street cart pretzels mixing with expensive perfume from passing pedestrians. She'd lived in this city for 12 years and suddenly felt like a stranger. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. Marcus. Well? Are we celebrating? She stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. Then she deleted his contact entirely. Marcus Ashford didn't want a woman with $12,000 in a failed marriage. He wanted the fantasy she'd sold him, the sophisticated, soon-to-be wealthy divorcee who could match his lifestyle and expectations. That woman no longer existed. Lydia started walking, no destination in mind, just movement. Her feet carried her north, through Midtown's canyon of buildings, past shops she could no longer afford to enter. She thought about calling someone, her mother, her friends from the foundation board, anyone. But what would she say? That she'd gambled and lost? That she'd underestimated the quiet man she'd married? That she'd discovered too late that construction workers who build empires are architects in more ways than one? Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her swipe to accept. Mrs. Cole? A woman's voice, professional but warm. This is Rebecca Chen from Whitfield and Associates. I'm calling to schedule a time for you to review and sign the dissolution papers. Would tomorrow morning work for you? Tomorrow. Less than 24 hours to officially end a marriage she'd spent 10 years planning to escape from. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. Tomorrow is fine, Lydia heard herself say. Excellent. I'll send the appointment details to your email. And Mrs. Cole? Rebecca's voice gentled slightly. Mr. Whitfield wanted me to let you know that Mr. Cole has arranged for you to have 60 days to vacate the penthouse. Moving expenses will be covered. 60 days. 2 months to pack up a decade of her life and find somewhere new to live on $12,000 and whatever she could get for her designer wardrobe on consignment. That's very generous, Lydia said, and meant it. Evan could have given her 30 days. Or less. The fact that he'd provided cushion, even now, said something about his character, something she'd spent 10 years overlooking. She ended the call and kept walking, her Armani suit drawing looks from tourists and deliverymen alike. She must look so successful, so put together, so completely in control. If only they knew the truth, that she was a woman who'd spent 10 years playing a part and had just been handed the final curtain. Somewhere around 72nd Street, Lydia found herself at the entrance to Central Park. The trees were just beginning to turn, early autumn touching the leaves with gold. She bought a coffee from a cart, $4, which she counted carefully, and sat on a bench watching joggers and nannies with strollers and tourists consulting maps. Normal people, living normal lives, not chasing some fantasy of wealth and status and escape. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a number she recognized, the foundation office. "Lydia, darling," Margaret Ashworth's cultured voice poured through the speaker. "We heard about your situation. I'm so sorry, but the board feels it's best if you step down from your position. Conflict of interest, you understand. We'll announce it as a mutual decision to focus on personal matters." They'd already heard. Of course they had. Patricia was probably fielding calls right now, managing the fallout, protecting her own reputation. Lydia Cole, the woman who'd tried to take down a beloved construction tycoon and ended up with nothing, was now toxic to the social circles she'd worked so hard to penetrate. "I understand," Lydia said. "Thank you for letting me know." She ended the call before Margaret could offer empty sympathies. The foundation position, gone. The social connections, gone. The entire carefully constructed network she'd built over 10 years was collapsing as word spread. And at the center of the destruction was Evan Cole, sitting somewhere with his quiet competence and his protected assets and his loyal mother, probably not even thinking about her anymore. Lydia finished her coffee, the cheap diner blend burning her throat. She thought about calling him, begging, explaining, but explaining what? That she was sorry? She wasn't, not really. She was sorry she'd been caught, sorry her plan had failed, sorry she'd underestimated him. But she wasn't sorry for wanting more, for being ambitious, for refusing to settle for a life of foundation dinners and Sunday visits to Queens. She was just sorry it had cost her everything. As the afternoon sun slanted through the park trees, Lydia Cole sat on her bench and began, finally, to understand what Evan had tried to tell her in the conference room. This wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about revenge. It was about a man protecting what he'd built from someone who'd never valued it, never valued him, never understood that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts and penthouses. True wealth was having someone who'd give everything to protect you, the way Marianne had protected Evan all those years, the way Evan was protecting Marianne now. And Lydia had lost that wealth the moment she'd decided it wasn't enough. The realization didn't make the situation better. It didn't change the math of her diminishing bank account or the reality of her collapsing future, but it did finally make it clear. Evan Cole had always been smarter than she'd realized. She'd just been too busy measuring the wrong things to notice. The apartment Lydia found 3 weeks later was everything the penthouse wasn't. Small, dim, with radiators that clanged through the night, and neighbors whose arguments bled through thin walls. It was a 6th-floor walk-up in Hell's Kitchen, the kind of building where the elevator had been broken for so long that someone had spray-painted stairs or nothing across the metal doors. The landlord, a suspicious man named Dimitri, who smelled like cigarettes and boiled cabbage, had required first month, last month, security deposit, and a broker's fee that consumed nearly half of Lydia's remaining funds. She stood in the middle of the empty living room, barely large enough for a couch and coffee table, and tried not to think about the penthouse's great room with its soaring ceilings and Central Park views. The single window here looked directly into another building, where an elderly woman in a faded house dress watched television with the volume turned up loud enough to rattle glass. "You are lucky," Dimitri had told her when she signed the lease, his accent thick and skeptical. "Very lucky I give you this place. Many people want." Lydia hadn't felt lucky. She'd felt desperate, grateful, and ashamed in equal measure. But she'd smiled and thanked him and pretended that a 400-square-foot studio with questionable plumbing was exactly what she'd been searching for. The moving truck arrived on a Tuesday morning, carrying the possessions Evan had allowed her to keep from the penthouse. She'd spent 2 agonizing days going through their home with Rebecca Chen present, documenting what was personal property versus marital assets now held in trust. Most of the furniture stayed, purchased with Evan's money, technically trust property. Most of the art stayed. The expensive kitchen equipment, the designer linens, the carefully curated collection of first edition books that Lydia had never actually read, all of it stayed. What she got to keep fit in a single truck. Her clothing, her jewelry, a surprisingly small amount, given that Evan had never been sentimental about gifts, her personal laptop, and a few photographs from before the marriage. Looking at the meager collection spread across the studio apartment, Lydia realized she'd spent 10 years accumulating a life that had never actually belonged to her. Her phone rang as she was hanging dresses in a closet barely large enough to qualify as a closet. Patricia Gaines. "I wanted to check in," Patricia said, her tone carefully neutral. "See how you're managing." "I'm fine," Lydia lied, shoving hangers onto a rod that immediately started to sag under the weight of Italian wool and French silk. "Settling in." "Good. Good." Patricia paused, and Lydia heard the real reason for the call coming. "I've completed my final invoice. Given the outcome, I've reduced my fees by 30% as a courtesy. But I still need to collect on services rendered." Lydia closed her eyes. She'd been expecting this, dreading this. "How much?" $42,000. I can set up a payment plan if necessary." $42,000. More than 3 times what remained in Lydia's bank account. She thought about the designer suits hanging in her inadequate closet, the Hermes bags that had seemed so important 3 months ago, the Louboutin heels she'd worn to charity events she'd never attend again. "I'll need to sell some things," Lydia said quietly. "Give me 2 weeks." "That's fine." Patricia's voice softened slightly. "Lydia, for what it's worth, you weren't wrong about the law. In 99 cases out of 100, you would have walked away with exactly what we projected. Evan Cole just happened to be smarter than most. Or I happened to marry the one man in 100 who'd actually fight back," Lydia said. After Patricia hung up, Lydia stood in her closet staring at 10 years of careful acquisition. Each piece had a story. The Chanel jacket purchased to impress at her first foundation board meeting, the Valentino gown worn to the hospital gala where she'd met Marcus, the Brunello Cucinelli cashmere that Evan had complimented exactly once, not understanding that it cost $4,000. She pulled out her phone and started photographing, preparing listings for the consignment stores and online resale sites she'd never imagined using. Each photo felt like documenting the death of someone she used to be. The divorce papers arrived by courier that afternoon, delivered by a young man who made her sign 3 times and initial twice. Lydia sat on the floor of her new apartment, she didn't own furniture yet, and read through the dissolution agreement with the careful attention she should have paid to the marriage license 10 years earlier. It was, as Evan had promised, straightforward. No assets to divide, no support obligations, no contested custody of anything because there was nothing to contest. The marriage of Evan and Lydia Cole was hereby dissolved, both parties released from all obligations, both parties free to proceed with separate lives. At the bottom, a space for her signature. Lydia found a pen in her purse, a Mont Blanc that Evan had given her for their 5th anniversary, one of the few gifts she'd actually liked, and stared at the blank line. Signing meant it was over. Really over. No more Mrs. Cole, no more penthouse, no more pretending that she belonged in a world of wealth and influence. Just Lydia Brennan again, the girl from Hartford who'd moved to New York at 22 with big dreams and bigger ambitions. The girl who'd waitressed and temped and networked relentlessly until she'd met Evan Cole at a construction industry mixer she'd crashed with a borrowed invitation. The girl who'd seen opportunity and seized it without hesitation or guilt. She signed her name in the careful script she'd practiced until it looked elegant, expensive, worthy of the life she'd tried to claim. Then she called the courier service and arranged for pickup because she couldn't afford to keep the papers a single day longer than necessary. That night, Lydia lay on an air mattress in her empty apartment, Real furniture required money she didn't have, and listened to her neighbor's television bleeding through the walls. A game show from the sound of it, with enthusiastic applause and a host's booming voice announcing prizes. She thought about Evan, probably sleeping in his bed in the penthouse, surrounded by silence and expensive sheets, and the kind of peace that came from winning, because he had won. Completely, decisively, without mercy. And the worst part, the part that kept Lydia awake as radiators clanged and the city hummed outside her window, was that she couldn't even be angry about it. He'd simply played the game better than she had, seen the end game while she was still celebrating the opening moves. The next morning, Lydia began the humbling process of rebuilding from nothing. She updated her resume for the first time in a decade, trying to make charity board member sound like actual work experience. She registered with temp agencies, swallowing her pride, as cheerful recruiters explained that her skills were a bit outdated and she'd likely need to start in administrative support roles. She canceled her gym membership, her salon standing appointments, her subscriptions to magazines she'd pretended to read. She learned to budget with the desperate focus of someone watching their safety net evaporate. Coffee at home instead of Starbucks saved $14 a day. Walking instead of Uber saved $20. Grocery shopping at discount stores instead of Whole Foods saved hundreds. Each small economy was a tiny humiliation, a reminder of how far she'd fallen. 2 weeks after signing the divorce papers, Lydia received an email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Regarding Marianne Cole." Her stomach dropped as she opened it. "Ms. Brennan," the email began, using her maiden name with deliberate precision. "My name is Eleanor Vasquez. I'm an attorney representing Mrs. Marianne Cole in estate planning matters. Mrs. Cole has requested a meeting with you at your earliest convenience. Please contact my office to schedule a time. This meeting is entirely voluntary, but Mrs. Cole would consider it a personal favor if you would agree." Lydia read the email 3 times, her mind racing through possibilities. Why would Marianne want to meet? To gloat? To ensure Lydia understood the completeness of her defeat? To extract some final piece of humiliation? She almost deleted the email, almost blocked the address and pretended she'd never seen it. But something, curiosity, masochism, or the faint hope that maybe Marianne had found some legal flaw, some loophole, some way to undo what Evan had done, made her reply instead. "I'm available this week. Let me know when and where." The response came within an hour. Thursday at 2 p.m., at a coffee shop in Queens called Rosie's, 2 blocks from Marianne's house. Lydia knew the place. She'd been there exactly once for a stilted Sunday dinner during the first year of her marriage. The coffee had been weak, the chairs uncomfortable, the whole experience aggressively ordinary. She'd made excuses to never return, and Marianne had stopped inviting her. Thursday arrived cold and gray, autumn asserting itself with the kind of wind that cut through expensive coats and cheap ones equally. Lydia dressed carefully, not too formal, not too casual, trying to strike a balance that suggested she was doing fine, perfectly fine, completely unbothered by the fact that her entire life had imploded. She chose black pants from Vince, a cream sweater from Theory, minimal jewelry. The outfit probably cost more than 3 months of her new rent, a fact that now seemed obscene rather than impressive. The subway ride to Queens took 40 minutes, carrying her further from Manhattan's gleaming towers with each stop. She emerged in a neighborhood of modest homes and family-owned businesses where corner stores advertised in 3 languages and children played in small yards behind chain-link fences. This was the world Evan had come from, the world Marianne had never left despite her son's success. The world Lydia had worked so hard to escape, only to find herself sliding back toward it. Rosie's looked exactly as she remembered. Vinyl booths, Formica counters, a handwritten menu promising daily specials and bottomless coffee. The lunch rush was ending, leaving a handful of customers lingering over pie and conversation. Marianne sat in a booth by the window, hands wrapped around a white ceramic mug, watching the street with patient eyes. She looked older than Lydia remembered. 71 now, with silver hair cut practically short, deep lines around her eyes that spoke of decades spent smiling and worrying in equal measure. She wore a cardigan Lydia recognized from years ago, sensible slacks, the same wedding ring she'd worn since 1975. Everything about her was the opposite of the polished, expensive women Lydia had spent 10 years trying to impress. "Lydia," Marianne said as she approached, her voice neither warm nor cold. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Lydia slid into the booth, hyper-aware of the cracked vinyl and the faint smell of coffee and bacon grease. A waitress appeared immediately, a woman in her 50s with a name tag reading Rosie, and filled a mug without asking. "Cream's on the table, honey," Rosie said with easy familiarity. "You want anything to eat?" "Just coffee, thank you," Lydia said. Rosie nodded and disappeared, leaving them in silence broken only by the clink of dishes and murmured conversations from other booths. Marianne watched Lydia with those steady eyes, and Lydia fought the urge to fidget like a child called to the principal's office. "I suppose you're wondering why I asked you here," Marianne said finally. "The thought crossed my mind," Lydia replied, aiming for casual and landing somewhere near defensive. Marianne took a sip of her coffee, considering. "I wanted to meet because I owe you an explanation, or maybe an apology. I haven't quite decided which." That wasn't what Lydia had expected. "An apology? For what?" "For helping my son take everything from you," Marianne said bluntly. "I know what Evan did. I know how he did it. I know you went from expecting $100 million to having almost nothing." She paused. "And I know I'm the reason it was possible." Lydia's throat tightened. Hearing it said so plainly, with such unflinching honesty, was somehow worse than all the legal maneuvering and professional distance. "So you're here to gloat?" "No," Marianne said softly. "I'm here to explain, and to offer you something, though you may not want it when you hear what I have to say." She set down her mug and folded her hands on the table, the gesture somehow formal despite the casual setting. "Evan came to me 11 weeks ago, middle of the night, 3 a.m., knocking on my door looking like he hadn't slept in days. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd fed him breakfast every morning for 18 years, and he told me everything. About your affair, about the divorce plans he'd overheard, about how you'd been positioning yourself for months to maximize the financial outcome." Lydia wanted to interrupt, to defend herself, but Marianne's steady gaze held her silent. "He was devastated," Marianne continued. "Not angry, which surprised me. Just broken. He said, 'Mom, I knew she didn't love me anymore. Maybe never loved me, but I thought we at least had respect, partnership, something real.' And then he asked me the question that started all of this. How do I protect what I've built without destroying myself in the process?" The coffee shop sounds faded into background noise as Lydia focused entirely on Marianne's words. "I told him the truth," Marianne said. "I told him that in this life you protect what matters most. For him, that was the company he'd built from nothing, the same way his father had tried to build something before the accident took him. I told him that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just beautiful destruction." She leaned forward slightly. "And then I told him I'd help, that he could transfer everything to me, that I'd hold it safe until the storm passed, and then we'd figure out what came next. I said yes because I'm his mother, and mothers protect their children when they can't protect themselves." "Even if it meant leaving me with nothing," Lydia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Even then," Marianne agreed, "because you were planning to leave him with nothing anyway, or at least nothing that mattered. His pride, his work, his belief that the person he'd chosen to love might value him for something other than his bank account." Lydia felt tears prickling behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. "You don't know what it was like, being married to someone who was so different from me, who didn't understand—" "Didn't understand what?" Marianne interrupted gently. "Didn't understand that you wanted more than he could give? Or didn't understand that what he was giving was actually everything he had?" The tears came then, silent and unwelcome. Lydia wiped them away roughly with a paper napkin from the dispenser, hating the weakness, hating that this woman who'd beaten her so completely was now seeing her cry. "I'm not trying to be cruel," Marianne said, her voice gentling further. "I'm trying to be honest with you in a way I suspect very few people have been. You married my son for security and status. He married you because he thought you were brilliant and ambitious and beautiful. Those weren't the same reasons, Lydia, and that mismatch was always going to end badly." Rosie reappeared with the coffee pot, refilling both mugs without comment, her weathered face carefully neutral. When she left, Marianne pulled an envelope from her purse and set it on the table between them. "This is why I really asked you here," she said. "Inside is a check for $50,000. Lydia stared at the envelope like it might bite her. "It's not guilt money," Marianne continued. "It's not charity. It's what I believe is fair compensation for 10 years of your life spent in a marriage that wasn't what you wanted or needed. Evan doesn't know I'm doing this. He'd probably be furious if he found out. But I'm 71 years old, and I've learned that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same thing." Lydia's hand trembled as she reached for the envelope, then stopped. "Why? Why would you do this?" "Because I've been where you are," Marianne said simply. "Not exactly. My circumstances were different, but I know what it's like to be young and desperate and convinced that security is the same thing as happiness. I know what it's like to make choices you can't take back." She pushed the envelope closer. "This money comes with conditions. You take it, and you promise me 3 things. 1, you use it to build something real, not to maintain a lifestyle or impress people who don't matter, but to actually create a life with meaning. 2, you leave Evan alone. Completely alone. No contact, no social media, no showing up at places you know he'll be. You let him heal. And 3, you think about who you want to be when you're my age, because time moves faster than you think, and regret is a heavy thing to carry." Lydia picked up the envelope with shaking hands. $50,000. Enough to pay Patricia, cover rent for a year, maybe go back to school or start over in a different city. Enough to breathe. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I tried to take everything from your son. I used him. Why would you help me?" Marianne smiled sadly. "Because holding on to anger takes energy I don't have anymore. Because you're not evil, Lydia. You're just lost. And because somewhere in the mess of this situation, I think there's a young woman who might actually find herself if she stops chasing the wrong things long enough to figure out what the right things are." She stood, leaving exact change for the coffee on the table. "That's all I wanted to say. Whether you cash that check or tear it up is entirely your choice. But if you do cash it, honor the conditions. Not for me, for yourself." Marianne gathered her purse and cardigan, preparing to leave. At the last moment, she paused, looking back at Lydia with something like compassion. "My son deserved better than what you gave him," she said quietly. "But you also deserve better than what you've been giving yourself. I hope you find it." Then she was gone, the bell above the door chiming as she stepped out into the gray afternoon, leaving Lydia alone in the booth with an envelope and a decision. Lydia sat there for a long time, the coffee growing cold in her cup, the envelope heavy in her hands. Around her, Rosie's continued its ordinary rhythms, orders called, dishes cleared, the espresso machine hissing steam. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by the weight of their own ambitions and miscalculations. She thought about ripping up the check, refusing Marianne's charity, maintaining some shred of pride. But pride wouldn't pay Patricia's invoice or her rent or buy groceries. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She thought about what Marianne had said. "Who do you want to be when you're my age?" The question was almost cruel in its simplicity, because Lydia had spent so many years focused on who she wanted to appear to be that she'd never actually considered who she wanted to become. She'd wanted wealth, status, admiration, all external markers that could be acquired or lost, built up or stripped away. She'd never wanted to be like Marianne, modest, humble, content with ordinary things. That kind of life had seemed like failure, like settling, like giving up on dreams. But sitting in this coffee shop, holding this envelope, Lydia wondered for the first time if maybe she'd had it backward. Maybe Marianne's life, with its deep roots and genuine relationships and quiet dignity, was actually the success. And maybe Lydia's endless striving for more had been the real settling, the real failure. She opened the envelope carefully. The check was exactly as promised, $50,000 signed by Marianne Cole in the same careful handwriting Evan used for important documents. A family trait, that precision. Lydia tucked the check back into the envelope and slipped it into her purse. She left a $10 bill on the table, far too much for 2 cups of coffee, But Rosie's kindness in not commenting on her tears deserved more than exact change, and walked out into the autumn afternoon. The walk back to the subway took her past Marianne's house, a modest two-story with a well-maintained garden where chrysanthemums bloomed in defiant yellows and reds. Evan's truck was parked in the driveway. A work truck, nothing fancy, despite the millions he controlled. Through the front window, she could see movement, two figures at a kitchen table. Mother and son, probably having coffee, probably talking about ordinary things. A life Lydia had been offered and rejected over and over again for 10 years. She kept walking. On the subway back to Manhattan, Lydia made a list on her phone. Not a budget or a plan. Those would come later. Just simple truths she needed to acknowledge. I married for the wrong reasons. I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I valued things that don't actually matter. I don't know who I am without the performance. I need to figure that out before it's too late. The list wasn't comfortable. It wasn't flattering. But it was honest, and honesty, real, unflinching honesty, was something Lydia realized she'd been avoiding for a very long time. Back in her tiny apartment, she deposited the check via her phone's banking app, watching the numbers in her account suddenly jump from catastrophic to manageable. The relief was immediate and physical, like someone had lifted a crushing weight from her chest. But along with relief came something unexpected: responsibility. This money was a second chance, freely given by someone who had every reason to hate her. Marianne had offered grace when she could have offered vengeance, and that grace demanded something in return, not repayment. Marianne would never accept that. But becoming someone worthy of the gift, someone who could look back at this moment and know she'd used it to build something real. Lydia pulled out her laptop and started researching, not luxury apartments or vacation destinations, but programs and possibilities. Community colleges with evening classes, nonprofits that needed volunteers with organizational skills, legitimate career counseling services instead of temp agencies. She thought about Marianne's conditions. Build something real. Leave Evan alone. Decide who you want to be. They weren't complicated. They weren't even particularly difficult. They just required honesty and effort and a willingness to stop performing for an audience that didn't actually care. As night fell over Manhattan, Lydia sat in her small apartment surrounded by the remnants of a life she'd outgrown, holding a second chance she hadn't earned, facing a future that was entirely uncertain. And for the first time in 10 years, maybe for the first time in her entire adult life, she felt something close to hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope that someone would save her or that circumstances would magically improve, but the quiet, determined hope that maybe, if she did the work and made better choices and stopped chasing illusions, she might actually become someone she could respect. Someone like Marianne, who'd built a real life from modest means and genuine connections. Someone unlike the woman she'd been when she'd walked into that conference room expecting a fortune and walked out with nothing but humiliation. Lydia opened a new document on her laptop and typed, Day 1. Then she paused, deleted it, and typed instead, Beginning again. Because Day 1 implied this was the start of something new. But really, this was just the continuation of a story she'd been writing all along. A story she was finally ready to write honestly, without pretense or performance, or the constant exhausting effort of being someone she wasn't. Outside her window, the city lights blazed against the darkness, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, each one a story of hope or heartbreak or something in between. Somewhere out there, Evan was rebuilding without her. Marianne was living her quiet, dignified life. Marcus had probably already found another woman to charm with promises of sophistication and romance. And here, in a sixth-floor walk-up that smelled like other people's cooking and echoed with strangers' arguments, Lydia Brennan was finally, terrifyingly, hopefully, starting to figure out who she actually was when she stopped trying to be someone else. It wasn't the ending she'd planned, but it was, she realized, exactly the beginning she needed. The beginning Lydia had needed turned out to be considerably harder than the moment of clarity that had inspired it. 3 months after her meeting with Marianne, she sat in a cramped classroom at Borough of Manhattan Community College, surrounded by students young enough to be her siblings, learning accounting principles she should have mastered a decade earlier. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the instructor, a patient man named Mr. Chen, who'd spent 30 years in corporate finance before retiring to teach, was explaining depreciation schedules with the kind of methodical precision that made Lydia's head ache. The declining balance method, Mr. Chen said, writing formulas on the whiteboard, allows for accelerated depreciation in the early years of an asset's life. This is particularly useful for... Lydia's phone buzzed in her bag. She ignored it, focusing on her notes, but it buzzed again and again. Finally, during the break, she checked her messages and felt her carefully constructed composure crack. 5 texts from her mother in Hartford, each one more frantic than the last. Mom. Lydia, why haven't you returned my calls? Mom. Your cousin Sarah said she saw you on the subway. Why would you be on the subway? Mom. I called the penthouse number. Some woman said you don't live there anymore. What's going on? Mom. Please call me. I'm worried. Mom. Your father wants to know if you need money. Lydia closed her eyes, leaning against the hallway wall as other students milled past, chatting about weekend plans and upcoming exams. She'd been avoiding this conversation for months, dodging calls, sending brief text messages claiming to be busy. But her mother was relentless, and the truth was going to come out eventually. She stepped outside into the January cold, her breath fogging in the air, and called home. Her mother answered on the first ring. Lydia Marie Brennan, where have you been? The use of her full maiden name, pointed, deliberate, told Lydia that her mother already suspected something. I've been busy, Mom. School, work, getting settled. Settled where? Sarah said you looked... Her mother paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound too judgmental. Different. She said you were wearing jeans and carrying grocery bags from Aldi. Lydia laughed, the sound bitter. Heaven forbid I buy groceries like a normal person. Don't be smart with me. What happened with Evan? Are you two having problems? The question hung in the frozen air between Hartford and Manhattan, weighted with all the expectations Lydia's mother had carried since her daughter had married into money. Barbara Brennan had worked as a dental hygienist for 40 years, raised 3 children on a modest income, and seen Lydia's marriage to Evan as vindication, proof that ambition and beauty could elevate a girl beyond her circumstances. We're divorced, Lydia said flatly. Have been for 3 months. The silence on the other end stretched so long that Lydia checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, her mother's voice came back tight with controlled panic. Divorced? How? Why? What about the settlement? There was no settlement, Mom. Evan transferred everything to his mother before I filed. I got nothing. Another silence, this one shorter but somehow more profound. Then, nothing? How is that legal? It's legal, Lydia said, watching her breath cloud in the air. It's also final. I signed the papers, moved out of the penthouse, and now I'm living in Hell's Kitchen, taking accounting classes at community college. Community college? Her mother's voice rose an octave. Lydia, what are you thinking? You need to fight this. Get a better lawyer. Contest the transfers. I can't afford a better lawyer, and there's nothing to contest. Evan was smarter than me, Mom. He protected his assets legally, and I lost. That's the whole story. But you were married for 10 years. That has to count for something. It counted for exactly what it was worth, Lydia interrupted, her voice harder than she intended. Which was nothing, because I spent 10 years treating my marriage like a business investment instead of a partnership. Evan figured that out and acted accordingly. She heard her mother's sharp intake of breath, the sound of judgment forming, and cut it off before it could fully materialize. I have to get back to class. I'll call you this weekend. Lydia, wait. But Lydia had already ended the call, her hands shaking from cold and the effort of maintaining composure. She stood on the sidewalk watching students stream past, young people with their whole lives ahead of them, unburdened by the weight of catastrophic mistakes and squandered opportunities. Back in the classroom, Mr. Chen was starting the second half of the lecture, discussing tax implications of different depreciation methods. Lydia forced herself to focus, taking notes with the kind of desperate attention that came from knowing this education was her lifeline. She'd enrolled in the accounting program because it was practical, because bookkeepers were always needed, because it offered a path to steady employment that didn't require charm or connections or pretending to be someone she wasn't. After class, she walked to her second job of the day, a 4-hour shift at a boutique in Soho that sold overpriced candles and home goods to exactly the kind of women Lydia used to be. The owner, A sharp-eyed woman named Delilah had hired her despite her sparse retail experience, probably recognizing in Lydia's designer wardrobe and desperate demeanor a story of downward mobility that deserved some measure of mercy. "You're late," Delilah said when Lydia arrived, though the clock showed she was actually 3 minutes early. "Traffic," Lydia lied, hanging her coat in the tiny back room. "There's always traffic. Anticipate it." Delilah gestured to the main floor, where customers browsed displays of artisanal soaps and hand-poured candles that cost more than Lydia's weekly grocery budget. "Mrs. Patterson is coming in at 4 to look at dining sets. She's particular, so let me handle her. You work the floor, keep the displays neat, standard stuff." Lydia nodded, tying on the black apron that served as the store's uniform. She'd been working here for 6 weeks, and the routine had become almost meditative, straightening products, wrapping purchases in tissue paper, making small talk with customers who never seemed to notice that the woman helping them had once shopped in similar stores without glancing at price tags. The afternoon passed in a blur of transactions and tedium. A young woman buying housewarming gifts. A man searching for an anniversary present who clearly had no idea what his wife liked. An elderly couple who spent 20 minutes debating the merits of lavender versus eucalyptus sachets. At 5:30, the door chimed and Lydia looked up from reorganizing a display of ceramic vases. Her heart stopped. Marcus Ashford stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, looking around the boutique with the vague distaste of someone accustomed to finer things. He hadn't seen her yet, his attention caught by a collection of crystal decanters near the window. Lydia's first instinct was to flee, to duck into the back room and hide until he left. But Delilah was watching, and running would require explanation. So she stayed frozen behind the counter, praying he wouldn't recognize her in the black apron and minimal makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail rather than the elaborate styles she used to wear. He turned toward the counter, their eyes met, and recognition flickered across his face like a candle flame catching. "Lydia?" His voice carried across the boutique, shocked and too loud. "My goodness, I almost didn't recognize you." She forced a smile, professional and distant. "Marcus, what a surprise." He approached the counter, his gaze taking in the apron, the modest appearance, the obvious reality of her situation. "I heard about the divorce, terrible business. I wanted to reach out, but—" He trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging between them. He hadn't wanted to reach out. He'd vanished the moment her fortune had evaporated, exactly as she'd known he would. "It's fine," Lydia said, her voice steady. "Water under the bridge. Are you looking for something specific?" Marcus blinked, clearly thrown by her composure. "Oh, yes, actually. A gift for my girlfriend. She has a birthday coming up." Girlfriend. Of course. Marcus Ashford was nothing if not efficient. "What is she like?" "She's very into wellness. Yoga, meditation, that sort of thing." He gestured vaguely around the store. "Something in that vein?" Lydia directed him to the aromatherapy section, pointing out diffusers and essential oil sets with the same polished professionalism she'd once used at foundation board meetings. Marcus selected an expensive diffuser and a collection of oils, making awkward small talk that neither of them believed. "You look well," he said as she rang up his purchase, the lie transparent enough to sting. "Are you doing okay?" "I'm doing exactly what I need to be doing," Lydia replied, wrapping the diffuser in tissue paper with practiced efficiency. "Sometimes that's the same as okay." Marcus nodded, accepting the carefully wrapped package. He pulled out a business card, new, she noticed, with a different company name than before, and set it on the counter. "If you ever need anything, a reference, networking introduction, whatever, I'd be happy to help." The offer was hollow, and they both knew it, but Lydia picked up the card anyway, slipping it into her apron pocket. "That's very kind. Thank you." After he left, Delilah appeared at her elbow, having watched the entire interaction from the back room. "Ex-boyfriend?" "Something like that," Lydia said, her hands trembling slightly as she straightened the counter. "He seemed uncomfortable." "People usually are when they run into evidence of their own cowardice." Delilah laughed, the sound sharp and knowing. "You've got some steel in you, girl. Good. You'll need it." That night, back in her apartment, Lydia sat on the secondhand couch she'd purchased from a Facebook marketplace listing and stared at Marcus's business card. The obvious thing to do was throw it away, acknowledge that any connection to that part of her life was toxic and pointless. But something made her keep it, tucking it into the drawer of her nightstand alongside other artifacts of her former existence. The Mont Blanc pen, a pair of diamond earrings she couldn't bring herself to sell, a photograph from her wedding day. Evidence that she'd once been someone else, someone she was trying very hard not to be anymore. Her phone rang. This time, it was her father. "Your mother's been crying for 2 hours," Tom Brennan said without preamble. "You want to tell me what's really going on?" Lydia closed her eyes. Her father was a man of few words and practical solutions, a retired electrician who'd built a comfortable life through hard work and careful planning. He'd been skeptical of Evan from the beginning, not because Evan wasn't successful, but because Lydia's motivations for marrying him had been transparent to anyone paying attention. "I made some bad choices, Dad. Now I'm dealing with the consequences." The divorce. Among other things, she heard the creak of his recliner, could picture him in the living room of her childhood home, probably watching a game with the volume muted. "You need money?" "No," she said quickly. "I'm managing." "Your mother said you're working retail." "Retail and going to school, learning accounting, building towards something stable." "Accounting's good," her father said approvingly. "Steady work, always needed." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of communication that didn't require constant words. Finally, Tom spoke again. "Your mother's disappointed. You know how she is. She was proud of you marrying up, thought it meant you'd made it." "I know. But I told her, making it isn't about who you marry, it's about who you become when things fall apart." He paused. "Seems to me you're becoming someone who can handle her own business. That's worth more than a rich husband." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. "Thanks, Dad. Come home for dinner next Sunday. Your mother needs to see you're okay, and I want to hear about these accounting classes." After he hung up, Lydia allowed herself 5 minutes of crying, quiet, contained, just enough to release the pressure building behind her ribs. Then she washed her face, made a cup of cheap tea, and returned to her homework. The months continued their steady march forward, each one slightly easier than the last. Lydia developed routines, rhythms, small pleasures that didn't cost anything. Saturday mornings at the public library. Sunday meal prep that stretched her grocery budget. Study groups with classmates who gradually became something like friends, though she kept them at careful distance, not ready to share the full story of how she'd ended up in community college at 33. Spring arrived, tentative and welcome. The city shook off winter's gray oppression, and Lydia found herself walking more, saving subway fare and discovering neighborhoods she'd never bothered to explore when she'd had money for Ubers. She walked through the village, past brownstones with window boxes beginning to bloom, through the Lower East Side where cultures collided in the best possible ways, through parts of Brooklyn she'd only seen from car windows, finding beauty in murals and community gardens, and the everyday resilience of people making lives from modest means. One warm April evening, she was walking home from her shift at the boutique when she passed a small storefront with a hand-lettered sign, "Free tax preparation, community volunteers welcome." Through the window, she could see people bent over paperwork, helping elderly residents and immigrant families navigate the labyrinth of tax forms and deductions. Lydia stood on the sidewalk watching them work, something stirring in her chest. She'd learned enough in her accounting classes to be useful. She had evenings free, and for the first time in months, maybe years, she wanted to do something that wasn't about building her own security or advancing her own interests. She wanted to help because helping mattered. The next day, she returned during their posted volunteer hours and spoke to the director, a woman named Carmen, who ran the program through a local nonprofit. "I'm still in school," Lydia explained, "but I've completed basic tax accounting. I could help with simple returns, data entry, whatever you need." Carmen looked at her with the assessing gaze of someone who'd seen every kind of volunteer. The ones who came for resume padding, the ones who lasted a week, the ones who actually cared. "We're always short-handed. Can you commit to one evening a week through tax season?" "I can commit to 2, Lydia said. That's how she found herself, 2 weeks later, sitting across from an elderly woman named Mrs. Santos, who'd brought 3 years of unfiled tax returns in a shopping bag. Mrs. Santos spoke limited English, her hands shaking as she tried to explain her situation. A widow living on Social Security, terrified of the IRS, convinced she owed thousands in penalties. Lydia worked through the returns methodically, her education finally applied to something meaningful. The numbers told a story. Mrs. Santos didn't owe anything. In fact, she was owed refunds totaling over $4,000, money that had been sitting unclaimed while she'd been too frightened to file. "Mrs. Santos," Lydia said gently, Carmen translating beside her, "you're not in trouble. The government owes you money." The woman's face crumpled with relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. She gripped Lydia's hand, speaking rapidly in Spanish, tears streaming down weathered cheeks. "She says you're an angel," Carmen translated. "She says you've saved her life." Lydia shook her head, embarrassed. "I just did the math." "The math she was too scared to do alone," Carmen said. "The math that gives her $4,000 she desperately needs. Don't diminish that." Walking home that night, Lydia felt something she hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Not the satisfaction of acquiring something or impressing someone or achieving a status marker, just the quiet, solid knowledge that she'd made a tangible difference in another person's life. Mrs. Santos would pay her rent, buy groceries, maybe even save some money for emergencies. And Lydia had helped make that possible, using skills she'd learned in a community college classroom, giving time she could have spent on 100 other things. It felt more valuable than any charity board position she'd ever held for appearance's sake. The semester ended with Lydia pulling a 3.8 GPA, her lowest grade a B+ in cost accounting that she'd struggled through while working 2 jobs. Mr. Chen pulled her aside after the final exam. "You're doing well," he said. "Better than well, actually. Have you thought about what comes next?" "More classes," Lydia said. "I need to finish the certification program." "You should consider the bachelor's program. You're bright, dedicated. You could do more than bookkeeping." The suggestion planted itself in Lydia's mind like a seed, both exciting and terrifying. A bachelor's degree would mean more time, more money, more commitment to a path she was still half convinced might be temporary, but it would also mean possibilities beyond keeping other people's books, actual career prospects, real advancement, a future built on genuine skills rather than marriage certificates. "I'll think about it," she told Mr. Chen. That weekend, she took the train to Hartford for the family dinner her father had requested months earlier. Her mother had prepared enough food for twice their number, a habit from raising 3 children that had never quite adjusted to an empty nest. The house smelled like pot roast and fresh bread, and Lydia felt something in her chest loosen as she walked through the door. Her father hugged her briefly, his electrician's hands rough and warm. Her mother held on longer, studying Lydia's face with maternal intensity, looking for signs of distress or instability. "You look different," Barbara said finally. "Different how?" "Tired, but also, I don't know. Calmer, maybe?" They sat down to dinner. Lydia, her parents, her younger brother Michael, who still lived in town with his wife and 2 kids. The conversation flowed around familiar topics. Michael's job at the hardware store, the grandchildren's activities, neighborhood gossip. Normal, ordinary, comforting in its predictability. Halfway through the meal, Barbara set down her fork with the deliberate motion that signaled she'd been holding back questions long enough. "Are you eating enough? That apartment you described sounds awful. Your father and I could help." "Mom, I'm fine." "You're working 2 jobs and going to school. That's not fine, that's exhausting." "It's temporary," Lydia said. "I'm building toward something better." "You had something better," her mother countered. "A penthouse, security, a life most people only dream about, and you threw it away." "Barbara," Tom interrupted quietly, his tone gentle but firm. "Over what? Some principle? Pride?" Her mother's voice rose, years of disappointment finally boiling over. "You could have fought harder, gotten a lawyer, contested those transfers." "I was having an affair, Mom." Lydia's voice cut through the room like a knife. "I was planning to divorce Evan for his money while sleeping with someone else. He found out and protected himself. There's nothing noble about my situation. I brought this on myself." The silence that followed was absolute. Michael studied his plate with sudden intensity. Her father's expression remained carefully neutral. Her mother's face cycled through shock, disappointment, and something that might have been recognition. "Well," Barbara said finally, her voice small, "at least you're being honest about it." "I'm trying to be," Lydia replied. "About everything. That's kind of the whole point of starting over." Her mother reached across the table, covering Lydia's hand with her own. "I just wanted better for you than what I had. Working so hard for so little, always worried about money." "I know, Mom, but your life isn't something to be ashamed of. You and Dad built something real, a home, a family, stability. That's worth more than I gave it credit for." After dinner, Lydia helped her mother with dishes while the men watched television in the living room. They worked in companionable silence for a while before Barbara spoke again. "I ran into Mrs. Harrison at the grocery store. She asked about you and Evan." "What did you tell her?" "That you were divorced and doing fine." Barbara scrubbed a pan with unnecessary force. She got that look, you know the one, the pitying, superior look that says, "I always knew that marriage wouldn't last." She wasn't wrong. Maybe not, but I still wanted to defend you. Tell her that my daughter was strong and smart and building a good life. She paused. "Even if I don't entirely understand what that life looks like." Lydia dried a plate carefully. "It looks like community college and retail work and a tiny apartment. It looks ordinary, but it feels honest, which is more than I can say for the last 10 years. "Honest is good," her mother conceded. "Honest is something you can build on." Driving back to the city that night, Lydia thought about what her mother had said. Honest as a foundation. It was such a simple concept, yet she'd spent so many years constructing elaborate facades that honesty had become almost foreign. But she was learning. Slowly, painfully, one difficult conversation and accounting problem at a time. Summer arrived with its particular brand of New York intensity, heat radiating off concrete, fire hydrants opened for neighborhood kids, the city smelling like hot garbage and ambition in equal measure. Lydia picked up extra shifts at the boutique, saving money toward fall tuition. She continued volunteering at the tax clinic, which had transitioned to general financial literacy workshops for low-income families. And she thought about Mr. Chen's suggestion, turning it over in her mind like a smooth stone. A bachelor's degree, a real career, a future that extended beyond simply surviving into actually thriving. One evening in late July, Lydia sat on her fire escape, her apartment's only outdoor space, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her swipe to accept. "Is this Lydia Brennan?" A woman's voice, professional and unfamiliar. "Yes?" "My name is Jennifer Hartwell. I'm the HR director at Marianne Cole's company, Cole Construction. Mrs. Cole gave me your number. She said you might be interested in an entry-level accounting position we have available." Lydia's heart stopped. "Marianne gave you my number?" "She did. She's not directly involved in hiring, everything goes through proper channels, but she mentioned you were studying accounting and might be a good fit for our junior accountant role. The position offers full benefits, tuition reimbursement, and a clear path to advancement." The offer was generous, almost suspiciously so. Lydia's mind raced through implications. Working for Evan's company, for Marianne's company now, technically. Seeing him regularly. Being constantly reminded of everything that had happened. "I appreciate the offer," Lydia said carefully, "but I'm not sure that would be appropriate, given my history with the Cole family." "Mrs. Cole anticipated you might feel that way," Jennifer said. "She asked me to tell you that this isn't charity. It's a legitimate job opportunity based on your qualifications. She also said to remind you of your promise, to build something real." Lydia closed her eyes, remembering that conversation in Rosie's coffee shop. Marianne's 3 conditions. Build something real, leave Evan alone, decide who you want to be. Taking this job would mean facing her past every day. But it would also mean benefits, tuition support, actual career development. It would mean building something real in exactly the way Marianne had challenged her to do. "Can I think about it?" Lydia asked. "Of course, but we'd like to fill the position within 2 weeks, so if you're interested, I'll need to hear back relatively soon." After hanging up, Lydia sat on her fire escape for a long time, watching the city's lights blink on as darkness fell. Somewhere out there, Marianne Cole had made a phone call, extended another chance, offered another piece of grace that Lydia wasn't sure she deserved. The question was whether she was brave enough, honest enough, to accept it. The decision took Lydia 3 sleepless nights and 2 conversations she didn't want to have. The first was with Carmen at the tax clinic, who listened to the entire story with the kind of focused attention that came from years of hearing complicated life situations distilled into simple questions. "So let me understand this," Carmen said, sitting across from Lydia in the clinic's small office after the last client had left. "Your ex-husband's mother, who helped him take everything from you in the divorce, is now offering you a job with benefits and tuition reimbursement at the company you used to think you'd own half of." "When you say it like that, it sounds insane," Lydia said. "It sounds complicated," Carmen corrected. "But complicated isn't the same as wrong. What does your gut tell you?" Lydia thought about that. Her gut had been an unreliable narrator for years, leading her towards status and security instead of authenticity. But lately, in the quiet moments between classes and shifts and volunteer work, her gut had started speaking a different language, one about purpose and growth rather than acquisition and appearance. "My gut says I should take it," Lydia admitted, "that refusing would be pride disguised as principle, that Marianne wouldn't offer if she didn't think I could handle it." "Then what's stopping you?" "Fear," Lydia said simply. "Fear that I'll see Evan and fall apart. Fear that I'll prove I can't actually do the work. Fear that accepting help from the people I hurt makes me weak or pathetic or—" "Human?" Carmen interrupted gently. "Lydia, you've been volunteering here for 4 months. You know what I've learned in this work? The people who refuse help because they think they don't deserve it usually need it most. And the people who think accepting grace makes them weak are the ones who've never really understood strength." The second conversation was harder. Lydia called Jennifer Hartwell on a Thursday morning before she could talk herself out of it. "I'd like to accept the position," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "if the offer is still available." "It is," Jennifer said warmly. "Can you start Monday? We'll need you to come in for onboarding, paperwork, orientation, system training, the usual first-day logistics." "Monday works." "Excellent. The office is in Long Island City. I'll email you the address and schedule." "Oh, and Lydia?" Jennifer's tone shifted slightly. "I want to be clear about something. Mrs. Cole may have suggested we interview you, but you got this job on your own merit. Your transcripts are excellent, your references checked out, and we need someone with your skill level. This isn't charity." "Thank you," Lydia said, meaning it. "I'll do good work." "I believe you will." That weekend, Lydia prepared with the kind of meticulous attention she used to reserve for charity galas and foundation meetings. She researched Cole Construction's history, learning details she'd somehow never bothered to know when she was married to its founder. The company had started 35 years ago when Evan's father, Michael Cole, had taken out a loan to buy a single backhoe. He'd built a reputation for quality work and fair dealing, mostly residential projects in Queens and Brooklyn. After his death, Marianne had kept the business limping along with a skeleton crew until Evan was old enough to take over. Evan had transformed it. He'd expanded into commercial construction, secured major contracts, built a reputation for completing projects on time and under budget. The company now employed over 200 people and had revenue in the hundreds of millions. All of that built on his father's foundation and his mother's sacrifice, grown through Evan's quiet competence and strategic vision. Lydia had been married to him for 10 years and had never really understood what he'd accomplished. She'd seen the money, the success, the outward markers, but she'd never understood the work, the risk, the daily grind of building something meaningful from nothing. The realization sat heavy in her chest as she picked out clothes for Monday, simple black pants, a white blouse, minimal jewelry, professional but not showy, competent but not trying too hard. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw something different than the woman who dressed for that settlement meeting 9 months ago. Less polish, maybe, but more substance. Cole Construction's offices occupied 3 floors of a renovated warehouse in Long Island City with views of the Manhattan skyline across the East River. The lobby was understated, exposed brick, Edison bulbs, photographs of completed projects lining the walls. Lydia studied them while waiting for Jennifer, seeing Evan's aesthetic in every choice. Nothing flashy, everything purposeful. Jennifer appeared right on time, a woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked hair and an efficient handshake. Lydia, welcome. Let's get you set up. The onboarding process was thorough and surprisingly normal. Lydia filled out tax forms, reviewed the employee handbook, sat through a presentation about company culture and values. She met her direct supervisor, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Chen, no relation to Mr. Chen from school, who ran the accounting department with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. We handle everything in-house, Patricia explained, walking Lydia through the department. Payroll, accounts receivable and payable, project accounting, financial reporting. You'll start with AP, processing invoices and managing vendor relationships. Basic stuff, but it needs to be accurate. Construction operates on thin margins. Small errors compound quickly. Lydia's desk was in an open floor plan with a dozen other accountants, analysts, and bookkeepers. Her computer was already set up, her email account active, her nameplate reading Lydia Brennan, Junior Accountant, in simple letters. No pretense, no inflation. Just her name and her role. She was logging into the accounting system when a familiar voice made her freeze. Patricia, do we have the Riverside project numbers yet? The client wants an update by end of day. Evan's voice, coming from Patricia's office, 20 feet away. Lydia's hand stilled on the keyboard, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected to see him on her first day. She'd hoped for time to prepare, to build up armor, to figure out how to be in the same space without falling apart. Give me 10 minutes, Patricia replied. I'm getting Lydia situated. Lydia. A pause. Then Evan appeared in Patricia's doorway, his eyes scanning the floor until they landed on her. The recognition that crossed his face was complex, surprise, wariness, something that might have been pain. You're working here. It wasn't a question, but Lydia answered anyway. I am. Started today. He looked different than she remembered, though only months had passed. Maybe a few more gray hairs, lines around his eyes that suggested he'd been sleeping as poorly as she had. He wore his standard uniform, dark jeans, a button-down with the sleeves rolled up, work boots. Looking at him hurt in ways Lydia hadn't anticipated. Did you know? He asked Patricia, his voice carefully neutral. HR handles hiring, Patricia said, her tone making it clear she had no interest in drama. Lydia's qualified. We needed someone. That's the whole story. Evan's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. His gaze returned to Lydia, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the office floor. Two people who'd shared 10 years and now shared nothing but uncomfortable proximity. Welcome to Cole Construction, he said finally, his voice formal. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the polished concrete floors. Lydia exhaled slowly, her hands trembling slightly. Patricia appeared at her elbow, her expression sympathetic but businesslike. You okay? I will be, Lydia said. Good. Because we've got 300 invoices that need processing by Friday, and I don't have time to manage personal drama. Patricia's voice softened slightly. But for what it's worth, whatever history you two have, Evan's professional. He won't make this difficult unless you do. The first week was a blur of learning systems, processing invoices, and trying not to look up every time she heard Evan's voice in the office. He was there often, more often than Lydia had expected for a CEO of a company this size. But Evan had never been the type to manage from a distance. He walked job sites, met with foremen, reviewed plans personally. He'd built this company with his hands as much as his mind, and he wasn't going to stop now. They developed an unspoken protocol. When Evan needed something from accounting, he asked Patricia or one of the senior accountants. When they ended up in the same meeting, they were scrupulously professional. When they passed in the hallway, they nodded politely and kept walking. It was civilized, mature, absolutely excruciating. 2 weeks in, Lydia was working late on a reconciliation that wasn't balancing when Evan appeared at her desk. Most of the office had cleared out, just a few workaholics and deadline-pressured souls remaining. You're still here, he observed. Vendor reconciliation. Numbers are off by 18,000. Lydia didn't look up from her spreadsheet. I'll find it. Patricia would tell you to pick it up tomorrow. Patricia left 2 hours ago. Besides, I want to figure it out. Evan pulled over a chair from an empty desk and sat down, surprising her. "Can I look?" She should have said no. Should have maintained the professional distance they'd so carefully constructed. But the numbers were making her eyes cross, and Evan had always been better at finding patterns than she was. "Be my guest," she said, turning the monitor so he could see. They worked in silence for several minutes, Evan's eyes scanning the columns with practiced efficiency. Finally, he pointed to a line item. There. Invoice was entered twice, different dates. Duplicate payment. Lydia checked the source documents and felt her shoulders slump with relief. "You're right. How did you spot that so fast?" "Practice. I spent 3 years doing this job before I could afford to hire someone else to do it." He stood, pushing the chair back. "You would have found it eventually. Eventually might have been 3 a.m., Lydia said. "Thank you." Evan nodded, started to leave, then paused. "Why are you here, Lydia?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with all the things they hadn't said. She could have given him the practical answer, the benefits, the tuition reimbursement, the career opportunity. But they'd built their marriage on convenient lies, and she was trying to build her life on something better. "Because your mother offered me a chance to build something real," Lydia said quietly. "And because I'm trying to become someone who deserves second chances." Evan was quiet for a long moment. "My mother has a bigger heart than I do." "I know." "Are you going to hurt her too?" The question should have stung, but it was fair. Lydia met his eyes directly. "No, I'm going to show up, do good work, and prove that her faith wasn't misplaced. That's all I can promise." "That's more than you promised me," Evan said, but his tone held exhaustion rather than bitterness. He walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Lydia alone with her balanced spreadsheet and the ghost of everything they'd destroyed. The weeks folded into months, summer transitioning to fall. Lydia found her rhythm at Cole Construction, earning Patricia's grudging respect through accuracy and reliability. She enrolled in the bachelor's program Mr. Chen had suggested, taking evening classes that the company's tuition reimbursement helped fund. She kept volunteering at the tax clinic, kept living in her small apartment, kept building a life from honest pieces. And she learned to coexist with Evan in the careful dance of professional proximity. They spoke when necessary, maintained courteous distance when possible, and slowly, painfully slowly, the sharp edges of their shared history began to smooth into something bearable. One October afternoon, Lydia was reviewing project budgets when Marianne appeared at her desk. She looked elegant in a simple navy dress, her silver hair styled neatly, every inch the trustee and matriarch she'd become. "Lydia, do you have a moment?" "Of course, Mrs. Cole." Lydia stood, suddenly nervous. She'd seen Marianne around the office occasionally, but they'd never had a direct conversation since that day at Rosie's. "Walk with me?" They took the elevator to the roof deck, a space Evan had created for employees with picnic tables and plantings and views of the city. It was deserted on a weekday afternoon, leaving them alone among the chrysanthemums and ornamental grasses. "Patricia tells me you're doing excellent work," Marianne said, settling onto a bench. "I'm trying my best." "She also tells me you stay late, take initiative, ask smart questions." Marianne smiled slightly. She said, and I quote, "The girl's got a head for numbers and the discipline to use it." Lydia felt unexpected pride warm her chest. "Patricia doesn't give compliments easily." "No, she doesn't, which is why I wanted to talk to you." Marianne paused, watching a plane trace contrails across the October sky. "The company is expanding. We're taking on larger projects, which means more complex accounting needs. Patricia wants to create a project accounting specialist role, someone to handle cost tracking, budget analysis, client billing for major contracts." "That sounds like a good addition to the team," Lydia said carefully. "She wants to offer you the position. It would mean more responsibility, a significant raise, and oversight of your own small team." Marianne looked at her directly. "But it would also mean working more closely with Evan. The project accountant interfaces with operations daily, sits in on planning meetings, travels to job sites occasionally." Lydia's heart rate kicked up. "I see. Before Patricia makes the formal offer, I wanted to check with you, not as your employer, as someone who knows this situation is complicated. Marianne's voice gentled. You've worked hard to build something here. I don't want to put you in a position that undermines that. Lydia thought about the question Marianne was really asking. Could she handle working more closely with Evan? Could she maintain professionalism while navigating the wreckage of their past? Could she prove that she'd actually changed? Or would proximity reveal that she was still the same person chasing the same hollow victories? I can handle it, Lydia said. Evan and I have figured out how to be professional. More interaction doesn't change that. You're sure? I'm sure that I want the opportunity. The rest, I'll manage. Marianne studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. Patricia will talk to you tomorrow. And Lydia? For what it's worth, I think you've done more than just manage. I think you've actually grown. After Marianne left, Lydia stood on the roof deck watching the city spread out before her. A year ago, she'd stood in a conference room expecting millions and walked out with nothing. 6 months ago, she'd stood in a coffee shop accepting charity she didn't deserve. 3 months ago, she'd stood in this building's lobby terrified of facing the man she'd betrayed. And now she was being offered a promotion based on merit, entrusted with responsibility, given a chance to prove herself in ways that actually mattered. The trajectory wasn't what she'd planned, but it was real, earned, built on actual competence rather than strategic marriage. And that made it worth more than any settlement she'd tried to claim. The formal offer came the next day, exactly as Marianne had described. Lydia accepted, spent 2 weeks in intensive training with Patricia, and stepped into the role with the kind of nervous determination that had become familiar. Her first project meeting with Evan was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Lydia arrived early, reviewing the Riverside Plaza development budget one final time. It was a $30 million mixed-use project, the kind of complex undertaking that could make or break a construction company's reputation. Evan entered the conference room with 3 other people, his operations director, the site supervisor, and the lead architect. He nodded to Lydia professionally, no acknowledgement that this was their first formal collaboration since the divorce. Let's talk about where we are, Evan said, pulling up project plans on the screen. We're 4 weeks in, on schedule, but running close on foundation costs. Lydia, walk us through the numbers. She did, presenting the budget analysis with the clarity Patricia had drilled into her. Material costs were tracking slightly high due to concrete price increases. Labor was on target. The contingency fund was intact but would need monitoring if costs continued trending upward. Recommendations? Evan asked. Lock in concrete pricing for the next 3 months if possible. Renegotiate with the supplier. We're a major client. We should have leverage. And I'd suggest moving 15% of contingency to a restricted fund now before we're tempted to use it for scope creep. The operations director nodded approvingly. The site supervisor made notes. Evan's expression remained neutral, but Lydia saw something flicker in his eyes. Maybe respect. Maybe just acknowledgement that she knew what she was talking about. Good, he said. Make it happen. Next meeting is in 2 weeks. I want updated projections accounting for the concrete negotiations. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing schedules and subcontractors and the 1,000 details that went into building something substantial. Lydia took notes, asked questions, contributed when she had useful input. And somewhere in the middle of discussing rebar specifications and inspection schedules, she realized something profound. This was what Evan did every day. This careful attention to detail, this balancing of competing priorities, this responsibility for hundreds of jobs and millions of dollars. She'd been married to him for 10 years and had never really understood the weight he carried, the constant problem-solving, the gap between making money and making something that mattered. She'd seen the results, the bank account, the lifestyle, the success, without ever understanding the process. And in her ignorance, she'd valued him for the outcomes while dismissing the character that produced them. After the meeting, Evan stopped her in the hallway. "You did good work in there," he said. "Thank you. The concrete pricing suggestion was smart. I should have thought of it myself." "You have a lot to think about," Lydia said. "That's why you hire people to think about specific things." Evan almost smiled. Almost. "Patricia said you're taking a full course load on top of working here." "Trying to finish my bachelor's degree. Your mother's tuition reimbursement makes it possible." "My mother," Evan repeated, something complicated crossing his face. She has a way of seeing potential in people that I don't always understand. She's a remarkable woman, Lydia said quietly. I didn't appreciate that when I should have. No, Evan agreed. You didn't. They stood in the hallway, the honest acknowledgement hanging between them like a bridge or a barrier. Lydia couldn't quite tell which. Finally, Evan shifted his weight, preparing to leave. For what it's worth, he said, I'm glad she gave you a chance, and I'm glad you're actually using it. He walked away before Lydia could respond, leaving her standing in the corridor with the taste of something bittersweet in her mouth. It wasn't forgiveness, not quite, but it was acknowledgement, recognition that she was becoming someone different than the woman he'd divorced. That night, Lydia sat in her apartment working on a financial accounting assignment. Her phone rang. Her mother, probably calling for their weekly check-in, but when she answered, it was her father's voice. Your mother wanted me to call, Tom said. She's been talking to Mrs. Harrison again. Lydia braced herself. What did Mrs. Harrison say this time? That someone saw you at some construction company, looking professional and busy. Mrs. Harrison wanted to know if you'd gotten remarried to someone in the industry. Despite everything, Lydia laughed. No, I work for a construction company in accounting. That's what I told her, and then your mother. Tom paused, and Lydia could hear the smile in his voice. Your mother told Mrs. Harrison that her daughter was building a real career, earning her degree, making something of herself through hard work and determination. Mom said that? She did, with a fair bit of pride, I might add. Her father's tone grew serious. She's come around, Lydia. Took her a while to understand what you're doing, but she sees it now. We both do. After they hung up, Lydia sat with that knowledge. Her parents' understanding, Evan's acknowledgement, Marianne's continued support. Piece by piece, she was building something that resembled redemption. Not the kind that erased the past, but the kind that acknowledged it and chose something better anyway. The seasons turned. Winter arrived, and with it the brutal honesty of New York cold. Lydia bundled up for her commute, grateful for the steady paycheck that let her buy a proper coat. She finished her fall semester with a 4.0, Patricia's recommendation letter for the bachelor's program glowing enough to make Lydia tear up reading it. And slowly, incrementally, the sharp pain of seeing Evan began to dull into something manageable. They worked together professionally, sometimes even effectively. They developed an ease born not from forgiveness, but from familiarity. Two people who knew each other's patterns and had learned to navigate around the broken parts. One December afternoon, Lydia was reviewing year-end financials when Marianne appeared at her desk again. Do you have plans for the holidays? Marianne asked. Going to Hartford for Christmas. My parents, my brother's family, the usual. And before that? We're having the company holiday party next week. I wanted to make sure you felt welcome to attend. Lydia hesitated. The company party would mean socializing, small talk, navigating questions about her history with Evan that people were too polite to ask directly but desperately wanted answered. I'm not sure that's a good idea, she said carefully. Because of Evan? Because of optics. People will wonder, gossip. It might be easier if I skip it. Marianne pulled over a chair, settling in with the kind of deliberate patience that suggested she had time for this conversation. Can I tell you something I've learned in 71 years? The people who matter don't care about gossip, and the people who gossip don't matter. That's easy to say when you're not the subject of the gossip. I've been the subject plenty, Marianne said. Single mother running a construction company in the 80s. The whispers were constant, that I didn't know what I was doing, that I should sell and move on, that I was holding on to Michael's dream instead of accepting reality. She smiled slightly. I learned to let people talk while I did the work. Eventually, the work spoke louder than the whispers. This feels different. It is different. But the principle is the same. You've done good work here, Lydia. You've earned your place. Don't let fear of what people might think rob you of belonging to something you've actually contributed to. The party was held at a restaurant in Astoria, a sprawling space that Cole Construction had helped renovate the previous year. Lydia arrived fashionably late, wearing a simple black dress that managed to be professional and festive without trying too hard. The room was already full. Accountants and project managers, site supervisors and administrative staff, all the people who made Cole Construction run. Patricia waved her over to a table where several accounting department colleagues had gathered. Lydia, come meet my husband. Thomas, this is the junior accountant I told you about, the one who found that duplicate payment issue on the Riverside project. The evening unfolded in pleasant conversation and good food. People asked about her classes, her background, her thoughts on the company. Nobody asked about Evan. Either they already knew and were too polite to mention it, or they genuinely didn't care. Either way, Lydia found herself relaxing into the evening's rhythm. Evan gave a speech around 9, thanking everyone for their hard work and dedication. He spoke with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, acknowledging specific achievements and looking ahead to the coming year's challenges. When he mentioned the accounting team's work on the Riverside project, his eyes briefly found Lydia's across the room. A moment of acknowledgement, nothing more. As the party wound down, Lydia found herself on the restaurant's patio, the cold December air sharp and clarifying after the warmth inside. She heard the door open behind her and turned to find Evan, his jacket collar turned up against the wind. "Hiding?" he asked. "Getting air. You?" "Same." He moved to the railing beside her, both of them looking out at the street below. "I'm glad you came tonight." "Your mother insisted. She's very persuasive." "She is that," Evan agreed. A pause, weighted with history. "You've done good work this year. Real work. I wanted you to know I've noticed." Lydia turned to look at him, seeing in his profile the man she'd married and the stranger he'd become. "Thank you. That means something, coming from you." "Does it? I wasn't sure it would." "It does, because I know you don't say things you don't mean." Evan nodded slowly. "I never did. That was always the difference between us." The observation could have been cruel, but it was just honest. Lydia felt it settle over her like the December cold, uncomfortable but clarifying. "I'm sorry," she said. "For all of it. For using you, for lying, for being so focused on what I wanted that I never saw what I had." "I know you are." Evan finally looked at her. "That's probably the hardest part. It would be easier if you were still the person I divorced. But you're not. You're actually becoming someone I might have liked if we'd met differently." "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation, like the depreciation schedules you're so good at, just noting how value changes over time." Despite everything, Lydia smiled. "Did you just make an accounting joke?" "I've been around accountants too long." He pushed away from the railing. "I should get back inside. But Lydia, keep doing what you're doing, the work, the school, the growth. It matters." He returned to the party, leaving Lydia alone with the cold air and the city lights and the strange, bittersweet knowledge that she'd finally earned something she could never claim, Evan's respect. The respect Lydia had earned became the foundation for something she hadn't expected, actual professional partnership. Over the winter months, she and Evan developed a working relationship built on competence rather than history. Their interactions focused on project outcomes instead of personal wounds. When the Riverside Plaza development hit unexpected geological issues that threatened to blow the budget, Lydia worked alongside Evan and the operations team to restructure financing and renegotiate supplier contracts, saving the project nearly $500,000. Patricia pulled her aside after that particular crisis was resolved. "You handled that well, stayed calm under pressure, found creative solutions, didn't let ego get in the way of doing what needed to be done." "I had good people to work with," Lydia said. "Including Evan," Patricia observed. "I've worked here for 15 years. I know your history, and I've watched you two figure out how to be in the same room without bleeding all over the floor. That takes character." The acknowledgement settled warm in Lydia's chest. Character. Not beauty, not charm, not strategic positioning. Character. The thing she'd spent so many years neglecting to develop while focusing on acquiring everything else. Spring arrived with its usual promise of renewal. Lydia finished her second semester with another 4.0, the bachelor's degree program beginning to feel less like a distant possibility and more like an inevitable achievement. She moved from her tiny apartment to a modest one-bedroom in Sunnyside, close enough to the office that she could walk on nice days. The new place had real closet space, a kitchen where she could actually cook, windows that let in morning light. It wasn't the penthouse, but it was hers, paid for with money she'd earned, filled with furniture she'd chosen carefully rather than acquired carelessly. Every piece had a story. The table from a Brooklyn estate sale, the bookshelf assembled with her father's help during a weekend visit, the couch purchased after 3 months of saving. The space reflected who she was becoming rather than who she'd been trying to appear to be. One Saturday morning in April, Lydia was at the farmer's market near her apartment when she literally collided with someone carrying an absurd number of grocery bags. "I'm so sorry," she started, then stopped. Evan stood before her, looking equally surprised, bags of vegetables and bread threatening to spill from his overladen arms. "Lydia, hey, hey." She helped him redistribute the bags more securely. "That's a lot of groceries." "Sunday dinner at my mom's. She's getting older, doesn't like to cook as much, so I bring supplies, we cook together." He shifted the bags, looking almost embarrassed. "It's become a thing." "That's really sweet. It's really practical. She won't ask for help, so I have to disguise it as spending time together." Evan studied her, taking in the jeans and casual sweater, the reusable shopping bag over her shoulder. "You live around here now?" "Couple blocks away. Moved last month." "The apartment working out?" "It's good. Quiet, decent light, affordable." Lydia paused, then took a risk. "How's Marianne doing? I don't see her in the office as much lately." "She's cutting back, letting me take more responsibility for the trust." Evan's expression softened when he talked about his mother. "She says she's earned the right to just be a grandmother, even if she doesn't have grandchildren yet." "She's earned that and more." They stood in the middle of the farmer's market, people flowing around them, the spring morning bright and full of possibility. The moment stretched, comfortable in a way their interactions hadn't been since long before the divorce. "Listen," Evan said finally. "This is probably weird, but you want to grab coffee? There's a place around the corner. Good espresso, terrible pastries, but the company might make up for it." Lydia's heart kicked up, uncertainty warring with something that felt dangerously like hope. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "Probably not, but I'm asking anyway." The coffee shop was exactly as described. Excellent espresso, pastries that looked better than they tasted, mismatched furniture that gave it character. They sat by the window, spring sunshine streaming across the scarred wooden table between them. "So," Evan said, doctoring his coffee with precision, "how's school going?" "Good. Really good, actually. I'm on track to finish the bachelor's program by next spring." "And then?" "Maybe graduate school. Patricia's been encouraging me to consider an MBA. Says I have the analytical skills and the business sense." Lydia sipped her latte. "It feels ambitious, like maybe I'm reaching too far." "You were always ambitious," Evan said. "You just redirected it towards something worth building." "That's generous, considering." "It's honest, considering." He set down his cup. "Look, Lydia, I've been thinking about this for months, about whether to say something or just let it be. But since we're here, I'm going to risk it." Lydia braced herself, uncertain what was coming. "I forgive you," Evan said simply. "For the affair, for the divorce plans, for all of it. I've been holding on to anger because it felt justified, but I'm tired of carrying it. You've done the work to change. You've earned a fresh start. I want to actually give you one instead of just tolerating your presence at the company." Tears pricked Lydia's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. We work together. You're doing good things with your life, and I'd rather move forward than stay stuck in what happened." "I appreciate that more than you know." Lydia wiped her eyes, laughing shakily. "Your mother would be proud of you." "My mother has been lecturing me about forgiveness for 6 months. This is as much self-preservation as nobility." But Evan smiled when he said it, the expression reaching his eyes in a way Lydia hadn't seen in years. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easier than it had in the entire history of their relationship. Evan told her about the company's expansion plans, his concerns about scaling too quickly, his hope to eventually transition more leadership to the next generation. Lydia shared her experiences at the tax clinic, the satisfaction of helping people navigate financial systems they found overwhelming, her growing certainty that her future involved both numbers and service. "You sound happy," Evan observed. "I think I am. Not the way I thought happiness would look, but actual, sustainable happiness. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Evan checked his watch, grimacing. I should get these groceries to my mom before the dairy goes bad, but this was nice. We should do it again sometime. I'd like that. They parted on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop, Evan heading toward Queens with his overloaded grocery bags, Lydia watching him go with the strange, fragile sense that something had shifted between them. Not romance. That ship had sailed and sunk and would never be recovered. But something closer to friendship, built on mutual respect and hard-won understanding. The following Monday, Marianne appeared at Lydia's desk with an unusual request. Do you have time for lunch? There's something I'd like to discuss. They went to a small Italian restaurant Marianne favored, the kind of neighborhood place where the owner knew her by name and brought her usual order without asking. After they'd settled into a corner booth, Marianne got straight to the point. I'm stepping back from the trust, she said, transferring full control to Evan. It's time. How does Evan feel about that? Relieved, I think. He built this company. Having it technically in my name was always just protection, not the natural order of things. Marianne stirred her soup thoughtfully. But that's not why I wanted to talk to you. I wanted to let you know that when the transfer happens, there's going to be a financial restructuring. Evan's creating an employee profit-sharing plan. You'll be eligible. Lydia set down her fork. Marianne, I can't accept. You can and you will, because it's not charity. It's part of the compensation structure for senior staff, and you've become senior staff whether you've noticed or not. Marianne's tone was firm. Patricia wants to promote you to senior project accountant. The profit sharing comes with the position. Does Evan know you're telling me this? It was his idea that I tell you. He thought it might feel less awkward coming from me. Marianne smiled. He's learning to be less stubborn about these things. The promotion came through 2 weeks later, along with a salary increase that made Lydia's careful budgeting suddenly much easier. She celebrated by taking her parents to dinner at a nice restaurant in Hartford, her father ordering the steak he always wanted but rarely felt justified splurging on. We're proud of you, sweetheart, Barbara said over dessert. I know I was hard on you after the divorce. I just wanted you to have security. I have security now, Mom, just not the kind you can marry into, the kind you have to build yourself. Tom reached across the table, squeezing Lydia's hand with his weathered electrician's grip. That's the only kind that lasts. Summer brought new challenges and new opportunities. Coal Construction won a major municipal contract, a community center in the Bronx that would serve thousands of families. The project was important to Evan personally, a chance to give back to communities like the one he'd grown up in. He asked Lydia to serve as the lead accountant, managing the complex public funding requirements and ensuring every dollar was tracked and reported correctly. This project matters, Evan told her during the kickoff meeting. Not just for the company, but for the people who'll use that center. Kids who need safe places to go after school, seniors who need community programs, families who need resources. I need to know the numbers are perfect because we can't afford to lose public trust. I understand, Lydia said. You'll have full transparency and accuracy, I promise. She kept that promise through a summer of meticulous record-keeping, regular audits, and coordination with city officials who had every right to be skeptical of contractors. When the first phase passed inspection with perfect documentation, the project manager from the city pulled Lydia aside. I've worked with a lot of construction companies, she said. Most of them treat the paperwork like an annoying formality. You've treated it like it matters. That's rare. It does matter, Lydia replied. This center is going to serve real people. They deserve to know their tax dollars are being used with integrity. The exchange reminded her of something Marianne had said months ago about work speaking louder than whispers. Lydia was building a reputation now, not through strategic networking or careful image management, but through consistent, honest effort. People were beginning to know her for her competence, her reliability, her integrity. It felt better than any charity board position ever had. One August evening, Lydia was working late at a job site. The community center construction was running behind schedule, and she needed to review some discrepancies in material deliveries. She was deep in inventory lists when Evan appeared, hard hat in hand, dust on his jeans. You're still here, he said. Supplier shipped the wrong grade of rebar. I'm trying to figure out if we can use it or if we need to send it back and wait for the right material. Evan looked over her shoulder at the specifications. Send it back. We can't compromise on structural integrity, even if it costs us a week. I figured you'd say that. I already called them. Correct shipment arrives Thursday. Good. Evan pulled over a folding chair, sitting down with the weary satisfaction of a long day's work. You know what I appreciate about you, Lydia? You don't cut corners. You could have pushed me to use the wrong rebar to stay on schedule, but you didn't. Because you wouldn't have accepted it, and you'd have been right not to. Still, it says something about who you've become. They sat in the construction site's temporary office as the summer evening cooled, surrounded by blueprints and budget reports and the slow, steady evidence of something meaningful being built. Can I ask you something? Lydia said. When did you stop hating me? Evan considered the question seriously. I don't think I ever really hated you. I was angry, hurt, disappointed. But hate? That would have required caring more about you than about myself. And once I realized you'd been using me, I stopped making you the center of my emotional world. That's very healthy and mature. I had a good therapist. He smiled slightly. My mom insisted, said I needed to process the betrayal properly instead of just building walls and pretending to be fine. Did it help? Eventually. Took a while to stop feeling like a fool, longer to stop wondering what I'd missed or could have done differently. Evan looked at her directly. But here's what I learned. I didn't miss anything. You were exactly who you presented yourself to be. I just chose to see what I wanted to see instead of what was actually there. I wasn't all performance, Lydia said quietly. Some of it was real. I did care about you. I just cared about the wrong things more. I know. That's what made it hurt. They sat with that honesty between them, the kind of truth that could only exist after enough time and growth had made it bearable. Finally, Evan stood, stretching his back. Come on. I'll give you a ride home. It's late and the subway's going to be a mess. In Evan's truck, the same work vehicle he'd driven for years despite being able to afford anything, they rode through the summer night in comfortable silence. When he pulled up to her building in Sunnyside, Lydia made a decision. Do you want to come up? I make terrible coffee, but I have good ice cream. Evan laughed. That's quite an offer. It's just ice cream, and maybe a chance to prove we can actually be friends instead of just colleagues who tolerate each other. Friends, Evan repeated, testing the word. I think I'd like that. Her apartment was small but welcoming, the space organized with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to value what she had rather than pine for what she didn't. Evan looked around with genuine interest, taking in the secondhand furniture and farmers market flowers, the textbooks stacked neatly on the bookshelf beside a framed photo of her family. It suits you, he said, better than the penthouse ever did. The penthouse was beautiful, but it was never mine. This place is actually me. They ate ice cream and talked about everything except their shared past, her classes, his expansion plans, their mutual concern for Marianne's health, their shared frustration with the subway system. It was easy, normal, the kind of conversation two people who genuinely liked each other might have. When Evan left, he paused at the door. Thank you for this. For the ice cream, the conversation, the chance to move forward. Thank you for being willing to try. After he was gone, Lydia stood in her small apartment feeling something close to peace. She'd married Evan for the wrong reasons, hurt him in unforgivable ways, lost everything in the process of losing him. But somehow, through hard work and honest change and the grace of people who'd had every reason to write her off, she'd found her way to something better than what she'd destroyed. Not a second chance at their marriage. That door was closed and should stay closed. But a second chance at being a decent human being, at building something meaningful, at becoming someone worthy of the respect she'd once only pretended to deserve. The fall brought the community center project to completion. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was attended by city officials, local families, and Cole Construction's entire team. Lydia stood in the back, watching Evan give a speech about the importance of investing in communities, about building not just structures but opportunities. A woman approached her during the reception, older, weathered, with kind eyes and calloused hands. You work for Cole Construction? I do. I'm Lydia, one of the accountants. My grandson's going to come here after school. Safe place to do homework, play basketball, be a kid. The woman's eyes were bright with tears. Thank you for building this. I just managed the numbers, Lydia said. Numbers matter. Everything matters. This place wouldn't exist without people doing their jobs with integrity. The woman squeezed Lydia's hand. Thank you. After she walked away, Lydia found Marianne beside her. That's the reward, Marianne said softly. Not the profit margin or the quarterly reports. That grandmother's gratitude. That's what we're actually building. I'm beginning to understand that. Good, because I have something to ask you. Marianne gestured toward a quiet corner. I'm establishing a foundation. Scholarships for children of construction workers. Funding for community projects. Support for families dealing with workplace accidents. All the things I wish had existed when Michael died and left me alone with a 12-year-old in a failing business. That's beautiful, Marianne. I want you to run it. Not full-time. You're too valuable to Cole Construction. But as a side role, maybe 20 hours a week. Patricia's already agreed to adjust your schedule. Lydia's throat tightened. Why me? Because you understand what it's like to lose everything and have to rebuild. Because you've learned that real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. Because you have the skills to manage it properly and the heart to do it meaningfully. Marianne's eyes held steady. And because I think you need purpose beyond just earning a living. You need to give back, to help others the way you've been helped. I don't know if I'm qualified. You're qualified. You're educated, experienced, and you have the integrity the role demands. More importantly, you understand struggle. That makes you perfect for helping people who are struggling. Lydia accepted the role and spent the winter months establishing the Marianne Cole Foundation, working with attorneys to structure it properly, with community leaders to identify needs, with families to understand what would actually help. She interviewed scholarship applicants, kids whose parents worked construction, who understood the risk their mothers and fathers took every day, climbing scaffolding and operating heavy machinery. One applicant, a 17-year-old girl named Sophia, reminded Lydia painfully of herself at that age. My dad's a foreman, Sophia said during the interview. He wants me to go to college, but we can't afford it. I'm good at math, want to study engineering, but maybe I should just get a job, help the family. What would your father say about that? Lydia asked. He'd say he didn't work this hard for me to give up on my dreams. But dreams cost money. Lydia approved Sophia's scholarship that afternoon. The decision easier than any she'd made in years. This was what money should do. Open doors, create possibilities, give talented people the chance to build something meaningful. Not buy penthouses or designer wardrobes, but fund education and opportunity and hope. Spring returned, bringing with it Lydia's bachelor's degree graduation. She walked across the stage at Borough of Manhattan Community College feeling absurdly proud of the simple diploma, the accomplishment meaning more than anything she'd achieved during her marriage. Her parents were there, her brother's family, Patricia, and several co-workers from Cole Construction, and Evan, sitting beside his mother in the third row, both of them applauding as Lydia's name was called. The celebration afterward was modest but genuine. Dinner at a good restaurant, conversation flowing easily, Marianne telling embarrassing stories about Evan as a child that made him blush and Lydia laugh. At one point, Lydia's mother pulled Marianne aside, and Lydia watched them talk with the easy familiarity of women who'd both raised children through hard times and come out stronger. They're getting along, Evan observed, appearing at Lydia's elbow. Apparently they have a lot in common. Single mothers, tight budgets, ambitious children. My mom was never really single. She had my dad's memory and his lunchbox and a whole community supporting her. Evan smiled. But I see what you mean. They stepped outside for air, the spring evening warm and promising. Evan leaned against the restaurant's brick wall, looking at her with an expression Lydia couldn't quite read. What? She asked. I was just thinking how different you are from the woman I married. Not just better or worse, just fundamentally different. Is that good or bad? It's honest, Evan said, and honesty is what matters. I wish I'd understood that 10 years ago. We both wish a lot of things. He straightened, his voice gentle. But I'm genuinely glad about who you've become, Lydia. Glad you found your way to this. And I'm proud to know you now, even if I couldn't stay married to who you were then. That means everything, Lydia said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me, not just the mistakes I made. Thank you for becoming someone worth seeing. The summer passed in productive rhythms. Lydia enrolled in a part-time MBA program. The foundation covered most of the tuition. Her job at Cole Construction provided the rest. She continued running the Marianne Cole Foundation, approving scholarships and funding community programs. She kept volunteering at the tax clinic, the work grounding her in purpose beyond profit. And she and Evan continued building their unlikely friendship, coffee on Saturday mornings becoming a regular occurrence. Their conversations ranging from business strategy to personal philosophy to their shared appreciation for Marianne's remarkable character. One August morning, over their usual terrible pastries and excellent espresso, Evan made an announcement. "I'm seeing someone, dating, I mean. Wanted you to know before you heard it through the office gossip mill." Lydia felt a complex swirl of emotions, happiness for him, relief that he was moving forward, and a small, irrational pang that she immediately dismissed as inappropriate. "That's wonderful. Who is she?" "Her name is Rachel. She's a civil engineer, works for the city. We met on the community center project. She was handling the inspection protocols." Evan's expression softened in a way Lydia had never quite inspired. "She's smart, funny, calls me on my tendency to be too serious. I think you'd like her." "I'm sure I would. You deserve happiness, Evan. Real, genuine happiness with someone who appreciates you." "So do you," Evan said. "Are you seeing anyone?" "No, I've been too focused on school and work and not making another catastrophic relationship mistake." Lydia smiled. "But I'm okay with that. I'm learning to be content with my own company, to build a life that's fulfilling even when I'm alone. That's healthy. It's necessary. I spent so many years defining myself through relationships, what I could get from them, what status they provided. I need to know who I am independent of anyone else before I risk inflicting myself on another person." Evan raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To knowing ourselves before we pretend to know anyone else." "To honest foundations," Lydia countered, and they clinked cups across the scarred wooden table. The years that followed brought steady growth rather than dramatic transformation. Lydia completed her MBA, was promoted to Director of Financial Operations at Cole Construction, expanded the foundation's reach to serve hundreds of families. She bought a small house in Astoria, adopted a rescue dog who'd been abandoned and needed someone patient enough to earn his trust. She dated occasionally but carefully, learning to distinguish between attraction and genuine compatibility. And she maintained her friendship with Evan, watching from a respectful distance as he built a life with Rachel, their engagement, their wedding, eventually the news that they were expecting a child. Each milestone brought Lydia genuine happiness, the kind that came from truly wanting good things for people you cared about, rather than resenting their joy. 5 years after the divorce, Lydia attended the dedication ceremony for the foundation's new scholarship program, a full-ride opportunity for children who'd lost parents to construction accidents. The first recipient was a young man named David, whose father had died in a scaffolding collapse 3 years earlier. "This changes everything," David said, accepting the award with tears streaming down his face. "I can go to college. I can build something. I can make my dad proud." Watching him, Lydia understood finally what Marianne had known all along. Real wealth wasn't the penthouse or the designer wardrobe or the bank account with 8 figures. Real wealth was having the resources to change someone's trajectory, to create opportunity where desperation had existed, to honor lost lives by investing in living ones. That evening, she sat in her backyard garden, modest but carefully tended, and called Marianne. "I wanted to thank you," Lydia said when Marianne answered. "For what, dear?" "For seeing potential in me when I couldn't see it myself. For giving me chances I didn't deserve. For teaching me what actually matters." "You did the work, Lydia. I just provided the opportunity. You provided grace. That's rare and more valuable than opportunity." Lydia watched her dog chase butterflies through the evening light. "I've been thinking about something you said years ago, about deciding who I want to be when I'm your age. I think I finally know the answer." "And what is it?" "Someone like you. Someone who builds real things and helps real people and lives with integrity even when it costs something. Someone whose wealth is measured in the lives they've improved rather than the zeros in their bank account." Marianne was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was warm with emotion. "That's the best compliment anyone's ever given me." "It's just the truth." After they hung up, Lydia sat in her garden as twilight deepened into night, fireflies beginning their ancient dance. She thought about the woman she'd been, desperate, ambitious, focused on all the wrong things. She thought about the woman she'd become, steady, purposeful, built on honest foundations. The journey between those two versions had cost her everything she'd thought she wanted, but it had given her everything she'd actually needed. She'd lost a marriage built on lies and gained a career built on competence. She'd lost a penthouse and gained a home. She'd lost the illusion of wealth and gained the reality of purpose. She'd lost a man she'd never really loved and gained his respect, his mother's guidance, and eventually his genuine friendship. Most importantly, she'd lost the performance of being someone she wasn't and gained the peace of becoming someone she could actually respect. The story could have ended differently. Lydia could have stayed bitter, could have spent years fighting legal battles she couldn't win, could have refused Marianne's grace and Evan's eventual forgiveness. She could have remained the woman who valued acquisition over authenticity, status over substance. But she'd chosen differently. Not perfectly, not without stumbling, but consistently enough that the small right choices had accumulated into a life worth living. Years later, when Lydia was 45 and the director of both Cole Construction's financial operations and the Marianne Cole Foundation, a young woman came to her office seeking advice. She'd recently divorced, lost most of her assets, felt like her life was over. "How did you do it?" the woman asked, her desperation painfully familiar. "How did you rebuild from nothing?" Lydia thought about that question, about all the partial answers she could give. Finally, she settled on the simplest truth. "I stopped measuring my worth by what I could take from others and started measuring it by what I could build for myself. I stopped performing someone else's definition of success and started pursuing my own definition of integrity. And I accepted help from people who saw potential in me when I couldn't see it myself." That's it? That's not small. Those things require daily choice, constant effort, and the willingness to be honest even when honesty is humiliating. Lydia leaned forward. "But yes, that's it. Choose differently. Work honestly. Accept grace. Build something real. The rest follows." The young woman left with tears in her eyes, and what Lydia hoped was a seed of possibility. Watching her go, Lydia remembered standing in Patricia Gaines' office feeling exactly that desperate, exactly that lost. She remembered Marianne offering her an envelope and impossible conditions. She remembered Evan's quiet competence finally earning her respect instead of her resentment. She remembered the long, hard work of becoming someone worthy of second chances. The memory didn't hurt anymore. It just was. A story of destruction and rebuilding, of loss and growth, of mistakes so catastrophic they'd forced fundamental change. The story of a woman who'd celebrated too early and learned painfully that integrity always has the final word. And in the end, that final word had been kinder than Lydia deserved, but exactly what she'd needed to become the person she was always capable of being. She'd built something real. She'd honored the second chance. She'd decided who she wanted to be. And that, Lydia understood now, was the only victory that actually mattered.